Hagmann Hagmann Report for today. It is Wednesday, January 7th, 2015. This is a live broadcast, and before right out of the gate, I would just want to say that portions of tonight's broadcast are sponsored by NatureBox. NatureBox delivers great tasting, wholesome snacks right to your door. You can forget the vending machine, the snack aisles, all of the stuff that's bad for you, and start snacking much smarter with wholesome, delicious treats. I could name many: pineapple rings, cranberry medley, all sorts of great stuff. You can support this broadcast by ordering a free NatureBox sampler box at naturebox.com/CFP-radio. That's right, free. Free NatureBox snacks are found at naturebox.com/CFP-radio, or simply go to hagmanandhagman.com, scroll all the way on the bottom, and click the box there, the icon for NatureBox. Well, folks, I'm Doug Hagmann. I'm co-host with my son, Joe Hagmann. Together, we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. You're about to hear an incredible 3-hour program tonight with Mr. Steve Quayle, Mr. Tom Horn. I'd like to say as well, you're listening to the only show where the news is presented to you in 3D. We look well beyond the headlines and bylines to bring you the news behind the news, the information you never hear about unless you tune into programs like this. For new listeners, I want to say hello to Karen listening live in Rome, Italy. Well, actually in the shadow of the Vatican. Oh, my goodness. We broadcast live each every weeknight from 8 to 11 p.m. Eastern. You can find us on the Internet. Our home base is hagmanandhagman.com. And, of course, we're simulcast by the Christians United Broadcasting Network. There, you can tune us in at the hagmanandhagmanreport.com. And I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. To take an excerpt from the introduction of Tom Horn's book, Exo Vaticana, I'll just say tonight's broadcast may shatter the comfort of closely held presuppositions and may result in, well, the wholesale alteration of crucial priorities. So be forewarned, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Tom Horn and Mr. Steve Quayle tonight, both guests on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Tom's website is RaidersNewsUpdate.com. That's RaidersNewsUpdate.com. Folks, please take advantage of all of the generous offerings by Mr. Horn, by Raiders News Update. I'm going to tell you, you can learn a whole lot. If you don't have Petrus Romanus, if you don't have Exo Vaticana, if you don't have many of his books, including books by Mark Flynn, David Flynn, I've got to tell you, you got to get them. You just got to get them just to get the knowledge behind what is what we're going to be talking about. And also at RaidersNewsUpdate.com, some pretty significant entries in the top raids for today. I just want to let you know that. And also SteveQuayle.com, SteveQuayle.com for links to the most important stories, and of course the critical updates at the it is alerts section. So you've got to check that every day. With that, welcome, Joe. I'm going to turn it over to you to bring the guests on and go forward.
Great to be here. Yeah, we have a fantastic show for tonight. We have Steve from SteveQuayle.com and Tom Horn with us. Both gentlemen are live on air. I'm going to turn it over to you, Steve, and let you bring in the show.
Well, I think, ladies and gentlemen, excuse my voice again. I'm getting over the crud, and thank you, everyone, for praying for me. I think tonight is one of those hallmark events, because it seems like when the Lord opens up the Hagmann and Hagmann show to both Tom and I, it seems like it's almost a key that unlocks the coming events in real time. Today we had some major announcements, one of the biggest being that what I've been warning about and telling people about, and Tom and I will be discussing these types of events, we have the situation where now sonic levitation has been brought to the foreground. It's on my website, SteveQuayle.com. The ancients called it harmonic levitation. So when you see the stories on my website and Tom and I talking about the great megaliths and the great buildings, whether it's the pyramids or the Russian cities where the stones are just phenomenally, unbelievably huge, 5,000 and 10,000 tons, you can understand that the only way to offset gravity is with electric torsion physics. And the ancients not only knew this, but they were taught it by their fallen angel fathers. So I don't know, Doug, if you and Joe and Tom saw that story, but it was a real-time story of what's happening, coupled with a story today that a man in Egypt who basically found a tunnel into the Great Pyramid, and instantly there were SWAT teams dispatched to him to keep him from revealing to the world what he found. So that's the background that Tom and I will be talking probably in the second hour. But first, Doug, if it's okay, I'd like to get to Tom first and foremost, because they led the way, he and Chris, obviously, on what was going to happen with the Black Pope, the final Pope. And I had just sent you an email, but Tom, good to be with you tonight. And I was going to ask Doug to ask you, but I'll ask you right now. Given the acceleration of the one world religion push from the Pope and all the Vatican statements, where are we now from your perspective? Because, again, you were the first one to bring out that this gentleman would be the Pope, and all of the wars that some of us have warned about between traditional Catholics and the new Catholics are beginning to take place, and there truly is going to be blood on the altar, not just in the Catholic world, but in the evangelical world. So, Tom, if you would just take your liberty and, explain to your heart's content.
Hey, thank you, Steve, and I'll get us started here, and then we can go wherever you guys want to go. And thanks, Doug and Joe, for having us back on the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. The last time Steve Quayle and I were on was, I forget, a couple of months ago at least. But I remember at the time, Steve, the next day you did, it's not Nielsen ratings anymore. I don't even know what they call it nowadays, but you went on to the web page where it shows the ratings, audience size ratings, which are actually more accurate now than the old Nielsen ratings. And you sent me the page that showed that the program that you and I did with Doug and Joe Hagmann was outpacing Fox News. It was outpacing Glenn Beck Radio. I mean, so people need to know that when we do these shows that the world is listening and the world is interested in this kind of material, so it's justified, right? That we update people, that we talk about it from our point of view, and that we share insights as we receive them. And I'm glad you mentioned the prophecy of the popes, because I'm still attuned to this. I believe that there was a phenomenon, actually, that started in 2012 with us today only kind of currently midway between something that might be coming in what I call Zenith 2016, right? Now, a lot of people, they associate the year 2012 with the end of the Mayan calendar, the long count calendar. Excuse me, Steve, I think I'm catching your cold over the phone. With the long count calendar. And so there for a while, you had everybody from Christians and New Agers to skeptics, historians. Everybody was enthralled until about 24 months ago. And I see an irony in this, because everybody thought the meaning of the year 2012 had something to do with the destruction of the world, and that when the world didn't wind up being destroyed in 2012, then there must not have been anything to what the Maya and some others were saying. They were just looking at the end of the long count, the Mesoamerican long count, that brought the astrological age of Pisces to an end and introduced the beginning of Aquarius. But guys like me, and thankfully guys like me, because of guys like David Flynn, Mark Flynn, and other geniuses out there, what we were looking at was the symbolism that was historic. It hadn't happened in tens of thousands of years. You had this equinox. You had the sun arising out of the mouth of the Ouroboros, the great serpent of the Milky Way. And that was the sun rising in Sagittarius, the centaur with a bow. Why would we care about that? Because that was the symbol for Nimrod coming out of the mouth of Leviathan, the sun god, rising to return to Earth, to become the Nimrod, to become the Osiris, to become the Apollo. The Maya predicted that same conjunction, and they did it as a harbinger, but not as most people were telling it. And you can go listen to Steve shows with me and Steve Quayle back in 2009, 2010, 2011. You can see me standing up in front of conferences, repeating part of what Steve and I were talking about. You can see me on some of these television shows like Prophecy in the News, and over again, I was saying it is a huge mistake to be saying that the Maya said that 2012 is going to represent the end of the world. That's not what they were saying. They did not predict the end of the world. What they said was a lot more interesting than that. They said that an era was coming to an end and that it would give birth to a new and final era that would start and that ultimately would see three things: the arrival on earth of two great and powerful men that the world would be looking to. We'll talk more about that later tonight probably. They also saw the arrival of a new form of humanity. So were they talking about transhumanism? I don't know. But then thirdly, they saw this as an era that would ultimately meet with the return of the gods. And here's the important thing. It wasn't just the Maya. And by the way, I don't subscribe to Mayan prophecies. I'm not a Maya. I don't put this on any par with the Bible. All of the work that I did in Petrus Romanus, Exa Vaticana, and the book Zenith 2016 was simply asking a question. Why did so many occult societies for thousands of years ago and hundreds of years ago predict that something was going to happen between the years 2012 and 2016, and redundantly, so many of them said the same exact things. Two great men are going to arrive on the earth, a new form of humanity, a new dawn of humanity, and thirdly, the gods are going to return on the earth. And when you understand that that's what they were saying, the Maya said that, the Hindu Kali Yuga calendar started during the 5th Mayan Great Cycle. It also predicted that these kind of global earth events would unfold on earth following the year 2012. The Cherokee rattlesnake prophecies, remember, Steve, us talking about that? Those are called by academics, so they're called the Chickamauguan star constellation prophecies, but that was 200 years ago in the very early 1800s. The Cherokee tribe set their calendar to end in the year 2012, but they wrote some very important, their prophecies are translated in academic circles and say some very important things about the return of Quetzalcoatl between the years 2012 to 2016. And as a result of what they saw or thought, they thought their giant winged serpent god was going to return. They call him the giant rattlesnake, winged rattlesnake god. And they said it would happen during 2012 to 2016 when Jupiter, Venus, Orion, Pleiades, when those star systems awoke, which is just, if you know anything about occultism and occultic circles, is astonishing because it's exactly the same star systems that so many of the Gnostics wrote about throughout history, that's encoded within the prophecies on the Great Seal of the United States and all of that. Then you had the prophecy of the Zohar 600 years ago. Orthodox Jewish priests writing in the Zohar, in the section in the Zohar called Signs Heralding Mashiach, Volume 3, Section 34. And what did they say? They say in the year 5773, that's the year 2012 to 2013, the Messiah will arrive on earth, but he won't be known yet. He will slowly begin making himself known to the nations around the world, and that he would be revealed potentially between 2012 and 2016. So there's a big list, by the way. If people want to get my book, and I'll actually just give it to them, and I'll talk about later how they can just get it for free. But if they want to get the book Zenith 2016, there's a whole list in there. I go through the 800-year-old prophecies of Rabbi Judah ben Samuel, who also predicted that the Messiah would appear on earth sometime around the year 2016. You had Protestant reformers, Jonathan Edwards among them, who believed that the Antichrist would arrive on earth between 2012 and 2016. And there's a huge list, and we list probably 24 of the Protestant reformers and preachers from the late 1700s through the 1800s who predicted that the Antichrist would arrive on earth between the years 2012 and 2016 specifically. And there are even Princeton University theological works, including the Princeton University Dictionary of the 1830s, in which you can find those predictions being made. The Antichrist will arrive on the earth, and the false prophet between the years 2012 and 2016. So there's a whole huge list. And my question from the beginning was, what in the world was causing Protestant reformers, born-again preachers basically, 200 years ago to predict that the Antichrist and false prophet would rise up between the years 2012 to 2016? They couldn't possibly have been in communication with Jewish rabbis 600 years before, or Maya Jaguar shamans thousands of years before, who were writing down their very same predictions. So there's something very extraordinary that was going on there. And I said all of that to bring us to the Pope, because this also raises the issue of the prophecy of the popes. Here you have a 900-year-old Catholic prophecy that none of our works say were divinely inspired. In fact, my belief system, I talked about this on television before the new Pope was elected, my belief system is that for whatever reason, the cardinals inside the electoral process there at the Vatican, the conclave, have been following the prophecy of the popes, kind of like a roadmap, and intentionally selecting people who they believe in one way or another can be viewed as fulfillment of the prophecy. And that was part of what went into our analysis that led Chris Putnam and I to predict 1 year before Benedict resigned. We were the only ones that did this. In fact, we took some ribbing for it. We had some Catholic scholars out there, including some in Rome, that were laughing at us. They were saying no pope has, for hundreds of years, no pope has ever resigned. Popes don't resign. Popes die in office. But we said we believed that Benedict would resign based on our calculations sometime around March or April of 2012. Well, that date came and went. We thought, well, maybe we missed it. Maybe we were wrong. And then in February the next year, Benedict makes his resignation. But what happens? The very first thing that happens is the El Observatorio Romano, which is the media outlet for the Vatican, give an interview to a writer, and this can all be Googled and read, gave to a writer at the New York Times, in which they admitted that Pope Benedict had actually internally, officially resigned, guess when, at the end of March in 2012, the very moment we said that we thought he would, and that he made it official internally. They started remodeling a building that was owned there at the Vatican grounds by the nuns so that Benedict could resign, live in it as the emeritus pope. And they started the process internally, secretly, only among those who knew, among the Curia, the Roman government there, preparing for the conclave that would ultimately wind up electing Pope Francis. And if you want me to, I can go through a whole list of why I think Pope Francis is a fabulous fulfillment of that prophecy. But the bottom line is this. I believe that something happened in 2012, whether it was the machinations of men and occultists who are following scripts that they believe were inspired by their own demonic gods, or whether indeed, demons can see things. Remember when Jesus cast out the demons at Gadara, and they said, "Are you come here to torment us before the time?" And the Greek language there, time, means an epoch, a specific moment in time. So they knew that time had not yet arrived. So maybe demons know something about dispensations. I don't really like using that term, but dispensations and times. Well, in any case, Pope Francis now is not only fulfilling some of the aspects of the final pope, I think his greatest acts might be just ahead based on information that is coming out, carefully being disseminated now from the Vatican.
Fantastic.
Well, and hey, Tom, would you, while we're on this subject, as you are standing right now or seated in wherever you're at, physically in your home, it's January 7, 2015. What should people be looking for next? I mean, from the standpoint, let's finish up the Pope, and you gave a marvelous overview, but what's next to come? Because, again, ladies and gentlemen, you should not dismiss this, and I would encourage all Catholics, all Protestants, all Jewish people, people of all faith to listen to this, because this is the man, And I'm saying this to the glory of God that said it before it happened, it came to pass. So what is it now? Let's finish up on the Pope, if you don't mind, Tom, and then we'll get into the other stuff we can talk about, CERN, Stargates, all the contemporary events that are right here, what we've warned about for decades. Now they're happening, 2015. But where do you see this whole thing going now, especially with the Pope's major emphasis on one world religion, making his statements on evolution, and then obviously, if you would, finish it up with the aliens, and go until you feel you've exhausted it, because, again, people need the bottom line, and I know there are people interceding for this show all over the world, and that's what we're trying to do. Jesus said, and the Bible says, surely the Lord God will do nothing except he reveals his secrets to his servants, the prophets. The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Tom Horn doesn't claim to be a prophet, neither do I, but we're watchmen, we're authors, we're investigators, we're researchers, and we are those men who have dedicated our lives to bringing forth the things that God has revealed. And thank the Lord that we're both doing the best job we can at being faithful to the calling. So go ahead, and Tom, and take it into that next realm, because we'll get through with that. Then we can go on to the other stuff.
All right, and by the way, Steve, you're correct. I don't claim to be a prophet. Chris Putnam never claimed it to be a prophet. There was a lot of analysis, a lot of work. If you read the book Petrus Romanus, you get that there was a tremendous amount of research, but we also uncovered some books that were supposedly unrecoverable. They're only referred to in history, but they were lost to history when some big library burnt down somewhere. We tracked some of those down. We republished them. We put them on a disc. In fact, we put a huge library of these books on a disc that I can also give away to people for free, that have some of the books that we turned up that was supposed to be lost to history. For instance, while we're not prophets, you know, there was a French Jesuit by the name of René Thibault, and 60 years ago he wrote a book called The Mysterious Prophecy of the Popes. He wrote it in French. We found it. We translated it into English. You know what he said? He said that the final pope, he said, this prophecy, he said, will come to its culmination in April of 2012, exactly the same time period that we had figured that Benedict would step down, paving the way for the arrival of the final pope. And he was a Jesuit educator. He taught in a university in Belgium, and we had to wonder, again, does this guy, you know, being in the position he was in, did he know something about how the Vatican has been following this prophecy? There was a major website, a major news site, the RT, you know. I forget what their expanded name is, but they just go by RT online. They're a major international news source. They wrote an article here just a couple of weeks ago in which they said they're becoming convinced that the Vatican is using the prophecy of the popes as a playbook, that they believe in it more than they are admitting. And then this week, some of the blog sites out there were on fire, and excuse me that I can't remember the name of the priesthood. The Vatican immediately started referring to them as renegades, but there's a whole segment of priests out there right now that just 2 weeks ago said they believe that Pope Francis is the fulfillment of the prophecy of the popes, that he is Petrus Romanus and will become the false prophet. And a bunch of the blog sites just lit up, and everybody was referring to it. And you can go and Google that, and you can look up those blog sites, because I can't remember the name of the sect that was saying that. But I would say that some of the Catholics out there that believe in the prophecy of the popes, why did Pope Francis, why did he name himself after an Italian Roman friar whose original name was Giovanni, and he changed it to Francesco di Pietro, or de Bernardone, which means Peter the Roman. Why would you name yourself? Why would you pick as a namesake somebody whose name was literally the last line in the prophecy of the popes? But what's more important, and then I'll get back onto today's news, Steve and Doug and Joe, is that by naming himself after Francis of Assisi, he named himself after a man who prophesied about the final pope. And his prophecies can be found online, and you can read them. He said that there would be raised to the pontificate a man who by his cunning would endeavor to draw many into following him, but it would be error and death, because in those days, he said, Jesus Christ will send them not a true pastor, but a destroyer. Why in the world? Because know this, Pope Francis is not an uneducated man. He's a Jesuit. He has degrees in science and theology. He's fully familiar with the prophecy of the popes. Why would he pick a man as his namesake that predicted that the final pope would be a destroyer and a deceiver? Anyway, it's extraordinary. It's like something out of a movie. Well, okay, but now, today's news, right? As you guys know, this year, here in the next few months, this final pope on St. Malachi's celebrated list of popes is going to do three things, and these, I think, may clearly illustrate whether he is indeed the false man of peace and humility that some conservative Catholics are starting to believe that he is shaping up to be. First of all, in about 3 months from right now, sometime right after March, he's going to issue at least one lengthy and rare encyclical on climate change and human ecology. I'm not going to take time tonight to talk about human ecology, but Google it, read about it. That's going to be part of the basis of his commentary. That's going to be submitted to the world's 1.2 billion Catholics on the role that they are going to need to play right away in their relationship with Gaia. Because understand, when the Pope submits an encyclical, this is almost right up next to speaking vicarious filii Dei, speaking as the voice of God. And this document is going to elevate the living earth organism to sentience, and it's going to be sent by Rome. Every bishop and priest on earth is going to receive it, and then they have the responsibility for distributing it to their parishioners, and they are to tell them that it is a moral imperative. Again, these are loaded words, powerful words. If you know anything about Catholicism and how you either will or won't escape purgatory to make it into heaven, if the Pope tells you it is a moral imperative that you support this, that's the next thing to holding a loaded gun to your head. And so it's a revelation that comes from God. Secondly, he's going to call together a summit of all of the world's main religions. So now not just Catholics, but all of the world's major religions. It's not going to include Steve Quayle and Tom Horn. We're not going to get an invitation, I guarantee you, but a lot of evangelicals are, and they're going to announce the need for obedience to Gaia too, not just by Catholics, but by all of the world's main religions. And you guys know that a lot of non-Catholic world leaders are heralding this position and this Pope as a person whose time has come, right? I mean, Pope Francis is literally being called the Prince of Peace. Just Google that, Pope Francis, the Prince of Peace. It's all over the place. He's the Holy Father of all religions, a lot of evangelical publications are saying. And they believe that him and this message, this human ecology message on environmentalism, is an idea whose time has come, and that the Protestant Reformation is effectively over. You can read that on evangelical websites. It's over. The Reformation is finished. It's time for the greatest names and organizations and denominations in evangelical Christianity to accept that this Pope is the spiritual leader of the world. I almost got off track because the third thing that he's going to do is he's going to begin combining the religious authority of the Church with the political authority of the United Nations. And that's going to start with an address to the UN General Assembly this coming year, 2005. And guys, I believe that by the Pope visiting the United States this year, as well as speaking to the United Nations in that capacity, it could be one of the most fantastic fulfillments of end times prophecy. It's almost like a page torn out of a novel, if you will, about the end times. There's one other thing that was on my mind while I was waiting for this show to come on, and then I'll take a break here and let somebody else say something. As far as the Pope's connection to the United States, let me remind people, it was during the second inaugural address in 2005 that President George W. Bush envisioned the specter of an emerging Babylonian-like one world government. And you can go and you can listen to his inaugural speech, in which he says, when our founders declared a new order of the ages, a new world order, the Novus Ordo Seclorum, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled. And you might recall it was that kind of occultic reference that caused Barry Goldwater to stay awake at night, right? Guys like him. Guys like him, guys today, guys like Tom Horn feared what this Pope and this U.S. President currently and what the United Nations are about to do here in the next few months. The union of politics and religion as a catalyst for global government. And all of the language, and you're going to see it in the encyclical that he's writing, has to go to government, to globalism, to global government. Goldwater, who I talked about, if you recall, he wrote in his works that there was an effort, behind-the-scenes groups, he said, including international bankers, that they had a carefully designed plan to bring about a new world order. And he said it was going to happen through the consolidating of the four centers of power. Remember this? Political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. And he said that as the managers and creators of this prophetic system, the power elite, as they set it up, he said they're going to rule the future of mankind. In fact, Goldwater was so concerned with the consolidation of government policy and religious creed that in the 80s, you might recall, he took the unique position of actually warning political leaders from the floor of the United States Senate that he would fight them every step of the way because he was afraid they were going to try to dictate their religious ideas to all Americans and then to all the world in the name of conservatism, but also he believed that they were going to use the whole environmental issue, the greening issue, and that the influence of the religious right, at that time especially the Republican Party, which is having a revival of dominionism now, was so bothersome to him because of his libertarian views that he believed that the end was almost nigh. And I've said for many years that I believe that theologians should have been the one, not Goldwater. Theologians should have been the one arguing against the combining of religious faith with politics as a legislative system of government, which Pope Francis is now poised to do this year, and man, is it catching steam. And I'm telling you right now, I believe that it harkens the formula upon which the Bible said the Antichrist would come to power. You cannot read the book of Revelation chapter 13 especially and not see the political figure of the Antichrist and political earthly authority deriving ultranational dominance from the world's religious faithful through the influence of an ecclesiastical leader that it calls the false prophet. But it is an apostate, harlot system. Jesus and his disciples that turned the world upside down. The Apostle Paul, they knew where the true power of God comes from, and they said it was through the preaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ. They never imagined the goal of changing the world through supplanting secular government with an authoritarian theocratic type combination. Jesus made it clear that his followers weren't even to fight earthly authorities because his kingdom was not of this world, he said. So what are we seeing now? We're seeing Goldwater's fears, my fears, literally coming to formation. And it will be the death of the New Testament church. I challenge anybody to go to the book of Acts, study the life of Christ, go study how the church behaved in the book of Acts, and show me where they connected themselves at the hip with political endeavors. Show me how they combined politics with religion and thought that by taking over the governments of the world, they could somehow create a moral theocracy, a kingdom age, and then present it to Jesus Christ. It is literally the system upon which the harlot church is going to rise and persecute all true believers. And we're seeing this unfolding right now before our very eyes. It's I think, personally, it's one of the most astonishing fulfillments of end times biblical prophecy, and it is poised to start unfolding in 2015. It's shocking, if not terrifying.
Well, and Tom, I would like to add to that the Green Movement. It's interesting, isn't it, that his first statement, what is it called, an encyclical or whatever, is going to be given on that, Gaia. Now, that throws us immediately into the book of Revelation and the four horsemen of the apocalypse. The pale horse is a green horse. Obviously, the Greek word is chloros. So even while you and I are on the air tonight, and you've just laid it out so consistently, I would encourage everyone to go back, download this, and listen to it. I want to make something clear. In Matthew 23:8 through 10, Jesus said, "But be ye not called rabbi or teacher, for one is your master, even Christ Jesus, and all you or ye are his brethren. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven. Neither be ye called masters, for one is your master, even Christ." It boils down, doesn't it, Tom, to no king but Jesus, and the world says you can't have your King Jesus? And what's fascinating to me is even now as the geopolitical scene is unfolding, you've got Russia and China going to be the ones to withstand the New World Order, because all NATO is the army of the United Nations, and all the United Nations is the global body who gives their power unto the beast and unto the false prophet. So I'm saying to people tonight, they had better understand what has just been shared in the last, 40 or 36 minutes by Tom Horn, because this is no longer, I'm telling everybody, Tom, we have to take them in a rearview mirror to history to show them how we got to the place where we are now. But right now, I'm praying, and so these are my serious prayers, that God will give everyone telephoto, eagle-like eyes unto the future so that they might see that what they thought was a far distance. I've even had Christians say to me, well, I'll be dead by then, it won't matter to me. I said, well, it'll certainly matter to your children and your grandchildren. And so this is what we're talking about. We're talking about the future. And I believe that God is so consistent, so amazing, so mind-blowingly wonderful that he's tonight going to lay it out, because we're going to talk about some heavy stuff tonight. And you're hearing about the system of the beast. You're hearing about how the whole world's going to wonder after the beast. And did you notice today, Tom, that even the Vatican couldn't bring itself to call these guys terrorists? The White House is still debating whether they're Islamic terrorists or not, even though they're quoting the Quran, shouting Allah Akbar, and with the ISIS salute in the air. See, the thing is that denial is so rampant. And then what's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, put this into perspective. Years ago I said that Roman Catholicism and Islam would merge. People said I was crazy, they wouldn't accept it. But yet you've got dialogue now between the pontiff and between the higher-ranking imams, because when you get right down to it, the unseen hand that's controlling all of these world events, and Jesus called Satan the god of this world, is Satan himself. That's why it's so orchestrated. That's why it's so organized. And Tom, one of my, I would say this, heartbreaking issues before the Lord in prayer is, God, we must be able in the realm of the Spirit to fight against these principalities and powers in order to stop the slaughter of our brethren, which brings me to blood on the altar. When you wrote that, Tom Horn, the point being is people could not believe that would even happen. Yet when you've got top evangelicals and top charismatics, i.e. Kenneth Copeland, I forget all of them that are embracing, the Rome saying, the Reformation is over. The point is that those guys, in effect, are giving over their power unto the beast, and they're joining in this one world religion. And so and I want to ask you this, as we have watched the slaughter of literally hundreds of thousands of Christians with every form of butchery, with every form of barbarism, with such horrific events, and yet the church in America yawns, or what calls itself the church, forgive me. And I use the word church, ladies and gentlemen. I don't mean the Catholic Church, the Protestant Church. I mean those who are professing Christians from the word ecclesia, which means called out ones. What's the word I want? Those who are called out of the world and separated unto the Lord. Yet I'm seeing everybody running full fury after the beast as if they believe there will be. Now look, we're seeing that there will be no political solution to a spiritual problem. But what Tom Horn just detailed, ladies and gentlemen, for everyone, is the world's spiritual answer to all the world's problems. And obviously the man of peace has to come on the scene, and I think, Tom, it's staggering. And those are the only words I can use, staggering. It's like absolutely being on a gyroscope on a spherical flat plane on a ball speeding out of control, trying to maintain your balance. And the only way you can keep perspective in this is to keep your eyes literally on Jesus. And the attack on the Word of God is surprising to me. Did you not? And obviously you and I would look at the same way, but I'm saying this rhetorically. Doesn't it surprise you how quickly the evangelicals or those professing Protestants have abandoned the Holy Scripture, especially in dealing with reality?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the denial of the Vatican, the United States, to condemn what's happening in the world today, the bombing that happened today that killed 12 or 14 people earlier this morning, the Pew Research studies that show that Christians are right now the most persecuted religious group in the world, and that their persecution is growing exponentially, and yet that's not what you hear. You're not going to go to Sunday church, or if you do, by the way, and if your pastor is talking and warning about this, then I would recommend you stay in that church. But yeah, I mean, and the reason, by the way, is that the Vatican and the United States system, we need the Muslims. The Muslims are too big, too strong, too many, and so it's like, our current president said not long ago something about how the Prophet of Islam must not be, whatever his language was, must not be repudiated, but that's not the way he said it. And basically that's the tone that the United States foreign policy and the Vatican foreign policy has right now, that Steve Quayle's prophecy is going to need to be fulfilled, and that everybody's going to come under this giant canopy, and that's going to include the Muslims joining Pope Francis and whatever this current upcoming political combination is going to be, in order to form the church that is described in the book of Revelation as a great harlot with whom the kings of the earth have been made drunk, and all the people of the earth have participated in fornicating with her. You said a moment ago there can't be any king but Jesus, but I want people to know that there is a system right now that is developing, and a man of horrendous unseen intelligence and diplomacy is standing right behind a veil that's getting ready to pull back. He's readying right now to emerge on the world scene as the world's political savior. By his side is going to be a religious prophet, a false prophet. That's been foretold by the Scripture. It's paganism's ultimate incarnation, the beast of Revelation 13. And as he makes himself known, scholars, including some of the most celebrated Christian leaders, are going to herald this guy's uncanny ability at resolving whatever emergency is going to give rise to his appearance. Congregations are going to be assured that his mark is not something to be concerned about, and only when it's too late is his popularity going to be understood for the ruse that it actually is. We're seeing this happening right now. The Pope speaking to the United Nations in an official capacity. Look, I don't think I want to get bogged down in this, and I think here in a few minutes we're going to go to the first break. But let me just say this. This whole thing with the Pope gearing up for his UN presentation on the economy of the earth and humans, he's already started arguing for a radical new financial and economic system that also is part of this prophecy. And it combines socialism with the divinity-izing of the ecosystem, environmentalism, a green gospel that is anti-capitalistic. Last month, this Pope ramped up demonizing of those who disagree with his Romanized version of Marxism and socialism, and he actually called the free market system that's guided the United States and similar countries for the last 150 years and made them the most powerful nations on earth, that then turned around and built things like the Red Cross and sent food to the nations of the world and the world's hungry and supported charitable causes all around the world. He said that it is an economic system centered on the god of money, And he said the dynamics of an economy like that, the finances, are lacking in ethics. So bottom line is, if you believe in free market capitalism, then according to this Pope, you're possessed by the demons of mammon. You lack genuine ethics, and you're going to need to get in line. And I would tell people, expect that kind of diatribe is going to continue. It's going to weave its way through the Vicar's upcoming UN presentation and his encyclical document. And you can believe it's going to be crafty. There are Opus Dei level scholars right now working hard to make sure that the language that is adopted by this Pope in that encyclical are clever and that they are potent, and that most of the world is not going to see the handwriting on the wall. They're going to emerge saying, this is the man. This is a man for all times. This is a man for all faith. The press is already saying that. You can't read the press, the mainstream press right now, and not see high praise. They want him to be the man of the year again. They want to give him all kinds of awards. They're inviting him to speak at everything. He's not just going to speak at the UN, by the way. He's also visiting the United States. Our president has already gone and visited with him twice, once publicly, once privately. And his forthcoming announcements are going to be unprecedented. And for those that don't know, a papal encyclical, this is very rare. It's among the highest levels of a pope's authority. And never has one in history been followed by a pope then addressing the UN General Assembly, and then following that, the representation of the world's greatest religions all in 1 year. This guy has a plan, the Vatican has a plan, and people are lapping it up. The world is in love with it. And if I look at Pope Francis just as a human, I would look at him and say, wow, really nice guy, and seems to be very concerned about the poor, and I wouldn't be concerned at all. But I happen to also be a guy who believes in biblical prophecy, and it's not hard to put 2 plus 2 as equaling 4. There's something very strange that's happening right now. By the way, there's also guys out there that did a lot of research. My buddy over there in Canada, Carl Teichrob, has written quite a bit on how, he hasn't written about it recently, but he wrote about it a few years ago, how the merger of politics and religion beneath the banner of the United Nations has been a pretext in the Vatican for some time, and using the saving of the Earth's ecosystem has been kind of the key that they've kind of honed in on in order to project an objective goal. I'm trying to think of the name of it. But remember this, it was like in 2011, the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, they published a document, and it was something like toward reforming the international monetary system in the context of a global authority, something like that. You recall what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Social and economic justice, I believe, was in there.
Well, if people Google that, they'll find it. They can read about it. The bottom line is it was a very unsettling directive in 2011 because what these council members were doing, they were using social, political, economic instability around the world, once again, as a, quote, moral mandate. And that's why the language of this current pope is being picked up exactly the way it is, because it's resonating with the power brokers behind the scene there at the Vatican. They were using it as a moral mandate to do what? To establish a global public authority and a central world bank. That's actually the language of the document. And this global authority and this central world bank would provide oversight not just for individual but world institutions. And if you read the document, you'll find that the origins of a lot of what Francis' current words are using is that it says stuff like the economic financial crisis which the world's going through is calling everyone, individuals, peoples. They have to examine in depth the principles, the cultural, moral values, blah, blah, blah. Bottom line is, it is to give teeth. It is for basically every great nation of the world to submit a portion of their individuality to the United Nations so that it can have universal jurisdiction over banking systems around the world. So that's another part. And we could do a whole show on that if you want to at some point, but that's another whole part of this Pope going and speaking before the United Nations that this has been literally in their framework just before, 1 year before Gloria Olivae, as the prophecy of the popes called him, Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, 1 year before he resigned, that document was published. He resigned, so we got to wait now for the new guy to get in here so he can fulfill this emerging requirement for a body that's going to carry out the functions of a kind of central world bank, and that's going to regulate the flow and system of monetary exchanges, similar to national central banks, except this is going to be a global authority with real teeth. And Carl Teichrob, if he's out there listening somewhere, he ought to write a follow-up to one of his magazine articles on that subject matter, because it was astonishing. And then one final thing I'd say before we go to a break, recall how in the 90s Malachi Martin warned that there was a plan by political authorities, transnational bankers, and that the Vatican was secretly being devised to establish a world government, a global economic system. And then a decade or so after his disclosure, you had the G8 summit in Italy that came together, and there was the Holy Father, right, meeting on the eve of the G8 summit with President Barack Obama, Pope Benedict. And he, too, writing an encyclical called Caritas in Verite, go and study that proposes exactly what Father Martin had alleged was coming, where in one section of that document, the Pope drops this ideological bombshell saying that a world authority is needed to manage the economy and to bring about timely disarmament and to assure food security and peace. So, again, loaded statements. It's the reference to a political world authority, but it's a very clear signal that Rome foresaw the arrival of this Jesuit, Petrus Romanus, and was helping prepare the way for what he now is going to do in the form of a global authority that will have power and enforcement, real teeth. I keep using that term, real teeth, because that's the way it's phrased in Caritas in Verite, that talks about the need for a global monetary system that will be controlled by the United Nations, and that it will work in tandem with the Vatican, giving it its moral guidance, and countries like the United States that will give it its political enforcement.
Yeah, Steve, if I can jump in here just for a second. Anyone who wants to access that document, just quickly go to point or paragraph. It's right near the end of the encyclical. It's number 67. That is the key paragraph in Caritas in Verite that really hits the Church's social, financial, and authentically human social relationships of friendship and economic sphere and so on. That's point number 67 in that document. Go ahead, sir.
Well, and like
I think that. Hey, Tom. Tom, I just want to interrupt you. The statement that Obama made was, "The future must not belong to those who slander the Prophet of Islam." But he should have gone on and say, "But anything you want to say horrific about Jesus of Nazareth, the Son of the Living God, the Redeemer of mankind, it's open season on Christians." I think what people have got to get in their mind, even those of you who voted for it, this is not a politically driven president. This is a supernaturally evil, empowered man who behind the scenes owes his allegiance and his obeisance to the same people that Tom quoted George Bush. By the way, George Bush, I think Senior quoted the New World Order quote 236 times in one form or the other. And so, I think it's really critical, Tom, that people understand this because, and just like when it comes to gun control, Doug, Joe, gun control, the United States has promised by the end of 2015 there will be total disarmament in the United States. Now, can they pull it off? I don't know. But global disarmament has already been signed. They signed that document, a couple weeks ago. So the point is, ladies and gentlemen, it's open season on you if you say no to the New World Order. It's open season on you if you say yes to Jesus Christ. And for those who says God has no children, in the book of Proverbs, and written by Solomon, when he's asking one of the questions, what is God's name or what is his son's name? Tell me if you have wisdom. Most people don't know that in the Old Testament it does specifically talk about the Son of God. So when I hear and argue with people, Islamic scholars, and people I argue with, I say, you're wrong. Do you believe Solomon was a wise man? Yes, I believe he's the wisest man in the world. Then I said, how can you tell the wisest man in the world that he didn't know what he's talking about? That's just an aside. But here's the thing that I want to share with. I think we've got, what, Doug? How many more minutes? A couple minutes? It's critical that people understand what this means. Tom isn't saying this or laying this out so clearly just so you can say, boy, that was an interesting show. This determines your future. It determines your children's life or death. And Tom, I'm going to turn right back to you. That's the thing that's lacking. This is my chief, I guess you'd say, heartbreak before the living God, that there seems to be no practical or tactical application of what you and I are warning about. Because, look, if I tell everybody the giants are coming, and I take them to, and I will after the second hour, and we talk about this, that the portals are opening, the stargates are opening, and the giants are coming, and in Popocatépetl, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, or Popocatépetl in Mexico City just last week or 2 weeks ago, they got guys seeing giants on the top of the mountain, and these guys were saying these giants are covering an area in 10 minutes that they'd take 3 hours to cover. So we're seeing all sorts of breakthroughs. Or just to wet the whistle for the next hour, years ago I was contacted by cutouts, meaning somebody who spoke on behalf of scientists, telling me they were scared to death at what they were seeing, not light at the end of the tunnel, but giant beings. And then that resurfaces just a couple weeks ago on a YouTube video. So this stuff is real. And people say, well, I don't want to know that stuff. It's too scary. No, God wants you to know that stuff because you don't have to be frightened. And the perfect antidote for fear is the truth. The perfect antidote for discomfort is the Word of God telling us in Him, Jesus, we live and move on and have our being. I remind everyone of that because the point is that you're going to hear stuff tonight, and just as Tom and Chris told you what was coming with this Pope, and the whole world snickered, just as Tom and I and others have been sounding the alarm about the aliens are God, they've created us, they're coming back, just as they've announced 2 new worlds, exoplanets that can support life. They have to build the case for exoplanets that can support life as we know it so they can say those are the guys that created us. Tom has laid out in former shows that we've done together the Vatican's position on who's coming back to Earth, Lucifer Telescope, Mount Graham, all the Indian, and he just ran through a list of them, the litany, the rattlesnake prophecy. All this stuff is coming to an explosive conclusive period. And tonight, when we go into hour 2 and hour 3, I want you to know that tonight the hidden works of darkness will be exposed, and it's up to every single person to call upon the Lord. If you're afraid, and by the way, some of this stuff scares me, I've got to be honest, and I quote King David, at the times I am afraid, I trust in thee. And God said his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Therefore, with the knowledge that the Lord is imparting through the Holy Spirit, and by us sharing tonight, you're going to be saved from it. If the opposite of destruction is deliverance, then it's a time to be delivered. And I get a kick, Tom, out of people who are out there talking all about deliverance and stuff. I talked to Pastor John Quayle in Billings on the phone, I think, yesterday, and he knows his stuff. If there's any pastor in America that knows how it all comes together and fits, it's John Quayle. And we're going to talk about tonight all of the spiritual attacks on God's people, and you'd swear that the people, and I'm sorry, you wouldn't swear, you declare freely, that's not a good choice of words on my part, we're not to swear by heaven or earth, but you declare freely that you would think we're living in the Middle Ages with the experiences of God's people and the terrors that are coming by night. So tonight we have to cover a whole lot of ground, but the purpose is to impart the truth. So when you see these absolute fulfillments of biblical prophecy coming together with the political, socio-economic statements that the most powerful people in the world, you'll know where we're at in time. You'll know where we're at in space. And again, Tom, it's like the words of Jesus. I'm praying tonight that Jesus said, if I've told you earthly things and you believe me not, how can I tell you heavenly things? Yet throughout the globe now, it's like everything that's been veiled. Not only was a veil rent in the temple when Jesus was crucified on the cross, but also, guess what? the veil is being torn asunder, so much that has been veiled, and I use that word in the definition of hidden, kept from us. The gates of hell no longer will be subject to, well, I don't really believe those things. I got news for you. You don't have to believe them because the atomic physicists are telling you something's going to happen.
All right, with that, we'll go to the top of the hour break. On the other side, we'll get into the spiritual massacre that has been occurring and is going to continue to ramp up as we are in a time unlike any other time in history. You're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this Wednesday.
At least in our part of the world, I want to say hello to Lars in Sydney, Australia, listening live. Also, Karen in Rome, Italy, Francis in London, UK, and just so many others all across the United States, North America, South America. God bless you for tuning in. You're listening to Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com. That's stevequayle.com. You've got to bookmark his website, check the alerts section every single day, and go through the photos of the day and so on. And, of course, Steve's written so many great books, more to come. Also, Tom Horn, RaidersNewsUpdate.com. That's RaidersNewsUpdate.com. Bookmark his site as well. Just tremendous wealth of information at that site, including tonight's top raids or today's top raids. Interesting stories there. Gentlemen, welcome back. We're going to turn it right over to you, Steve. Go ahead, sir.
Well, Doug, thank you so much. And Tom and I have been warning about the portals and the gates of hell. And I want to just, for the last year, I haven't said anything. I think I told you, Doug, and I obviously told Tom ahead of time. But, the Lord has, and I mean this, I feel that whenever I come up with something, the work I'm doing and the work Tom's doing parallel each other, even though we don't, communicate over what we're doing. We find out, we come on your show, what God's had us to do. And the new book that I put out is really critical for this time. First of all, I want to make a real important statement. The book that's going to be ready to ship out around the 1st of February is called Little Creatures, The Gates of Hell Are Opening. And in that book, I think it's so timely because of the amount of Christians that are calling Pastor John Kyle and others that are having night terrors or having events happening in their life they can't explain. So basically, if people understood that the fairy tales were not harmless, if they understood that Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, Snow White, Rose Red, all of the Brothers Grimm, and all of the different fairy tales from all the different lands all have a central theme. And I want to give someone a quote tonight everyone a quote that I found interesting, Tom. You'll find this interesting too. According to Alexander Carmichael, who was a pastor in the early 1800s in Scotland, in supposedly having a conversation with one of these, and when I say we people, I'm not talking about again dwarfs, little people. I'm talking about creatures that have passed into our common vernacular, whether they're fairies, gnomes, brownies, sprites, the sea, the S-H-E-E, the she, which is spelled S-I-D-H-E. All of these things have a common root, and here it is from one of their own mouths. God be between me and every fairy, every ill wish, and every druidry. Today is Thursday on sea and land. Not of the seed of Abraham are we, nor is Abraham our father, but of the seed of the proud angel, driven forth from heaven. Now, I want to ask a few questions, and then I want to just get into this, Tom, and we'll go back and forth, if you don't mind, because it's important. You cannot deal with giants and Native American legends or Australian Aboriginal legends, the Menhuni in Hawaii. You can't deal with Java. There is no place from the frozen north of Scandinavia to the Patagonia southernmost part of the habitable southern hemisphere, where they don't have stories that coincide. Now, why is this important? And this is really critical. It's important because this is what people are seeing now. This is what they're dealing with now. And here are some of the questions. Why are some human beings being seduced today by evil spirits masquerading as various little creatures? And why is there a diabolical attempt to genetically engineer chimera-like hybrids, part human and part animal, possessed by evil spirits?
Why are more Hollywood stars embracing the Middle Ages sexual experience with incubus and succubus demonic entities? Where did the term Lilith the night hag come from, and what is the origin of the term man-eater as it relates to the terror by night that Psalm 91 refers to? How are the dragons and giants universally found in fairy tales linked to biblical creatures as well as supernatural monsters that seem to be reappearing around the world? Why are these monsters reappearing now after a long period of inactivity? What is the true nature of little creatures, and why do they come in various shapes and sizes? Now, what did Jesus mean when referring to the gates of hell, and how is this pertinent to us today, and how can we fight and overcome the evil coming through the gates of hell? One only has to counsel people or read my emails in a given week, and I'd always protect the people, but I think I'm going to start posting them to show Tom, Doug, and Joe that real Christians who love Jesus are having these events happen in their life, and they have to learn to take their authority. Remarkably, there's not one person that I've heard from that even being terrorized by these things after having, whether it's deliverance or using the name of Jesus, these events stop. But Little Creatures is on the front of my website, and it doesn't come out until February 1st, and I'm giving a 25% discount, and there's instructions there. It's not on my shopping cart because it's a pain to get it up there, and my shopping cart won't take it until it's in stock, blah, blah, blah. So you can get it ahead of pre-publication, save 25% by sending a check, and all the instructions are there. But, Tom, going back to our time together on the radio, what's interesting to me, more so than ever now, is the fact that when the gospel was the predominant belief system in the world, it's like God in his mercy chained up or held back all the forces of darkness so the gospel could go forth and be preached to all the creatures under heaven. Now that Jesus has been so maligned, he said they hated me without a cause, the idea that is so now pronounced before us, or manifesting before us, a better way to say that. Come on, Steve, you know how to say it better than that. The point being is people are having encounters, whether it's aliens, whether it's the sexual experiences. And by the way, again, Little Creatures is not for kids. I would tell you all up front, this is not for kids, because I deal with the reality of how the ancients looked at this, whether I'm dealing with the jinn, whether I'm dealing with spirit lights, weird science, all that stuff. And trust me, when I say it's evil, we're talking about evil. Now, Jesus said, he gives us power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy. But what I think is important is now is the time that God in his mercy wants to identify the root of evil so that as people can understand that in spiritual warfare you've got to deal with the roots, and you have to basically supernaturally take dominion over those roots, just like the fig tree. You can see the fig tree at one point when Jesus cursed it, it didn't look like anything happened. When the disciples passed by the second time, it had dried up from the roots. The only way to deal with the fruit of evil is to identify the root of evil. And as I said at the beginning of the show, Tom and I have been warning, there's something to be said when Shiva, the destroyer of worlds, is the symbolic mascot of CERN, CERN being the relative heavy, collider in Switzerland. The point being is that they are having supernatural experiences, and people think I'm just making this stuff up. I was contacted by a multi-star general 2 years ago when it went down, and 4 stars, and he was talking about just how at times they, meaning the good guys, were stopping the bad guys from opening up the portal. And it was blamed on a sandwich, but take this for what it's worth and ask the Lord about it. If stargates are real, and I believe they are, Tom Horn believes they are, and let's even say there are people that know how to utilize them at this point, then you've got to understand that there was a time period where I believe God gave this country, the United States, time to repent. As I speak to all the intercessors I know, and I know plenty around the world, I know them in South Africa, some of them, I don't know them all, in Australia, in Asia, they are saying the same thing. God is saying, The United States has passed into judgment. Now, I'm speaking for myself here, and what I believe the intercessors are saying, pray for the people of God to be able to stand in the evil day. What Tom Horn has just laid out for you before we go into Stargates, and I'm turning it right over to you, Tom, now, is the fact that this is what's going on in the earthly realm. We have talked at length about what's going to go on in the heavenly realm, and that's my next question to you, Tom Horn. Given the Vatican's now, obviously, the whole, the aliens are brothers, they can be baptized, how do you see that playing out? How do you see it playing out concurrently with the one world religion, the one world economic system, and basically the purging by martyrdom and slaughter of the Christians?
Yeah, those are all very important questions, and I'll try to deal with each one of them point by point if we can, including what's going on at Mount Graham, how does that connect with what the Pope is doing now? But you said some really important stuff just now, Steve, and you said, people don't, might not take your word for it concerning Stargates and that sort of thing. What they need to know is that CERN themselves, their own physicists, are saying that they're using the Large Hadron Collider, that they've been using it and they intend to use it for one specific purpose, and that is to find other dimensions and to open a gateway, a doorway to those dimensions. So we'll talk about that in a moment and actually make even quotes of what their own scientists are saying right now. Some years ago, you and I did like a 6-hour series, and it's been like one of the, I can't even remember the name of it now. I think it might be The Return of, it might be, I forget what it's called. It's an audio set. And people at Survivor Mall tell me it's perennially one of the best-selling sets they have over there. But that whole 6 hours was when CERN was first set up. And you and I were out there doing radio, and we said we think this thing is something like a Stargate. We think they're going to use this for trying to find other dimensions and opening other dimensions. And people thought, well, okay, it's Tom and Steve out there, doing their thing again. Well, fast forward now, 6 years later, and lo and behold, CERN's own physicists are out there saying, what are we using it for? We're amping up the power. We're opening portals. We're looking for other dimensions that are beyond the dimensions as we understand them today, and we want to open a gateway, and we might send something through it or something might come through it. That's what their own leading physicists that work at CERN are saying. But I want people to know something. When you open those gateways, things do come through them, and that's what Steve Quayle's new book is all about, that there are not just giants, but there are all kinds of cryptid beings. They've been recorded from the beginning of history and forward, and your new research is absolutely timely. It's astonishing. And Steve will tell you that I've been emailing him, and I've been saying, you have got to be one of the first guys, if not the first guy, on Skywatch Television, which I've poured all my investments into. We're going to be launching it here probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We just launched the Facebook page. We'll have the new website up soon. I want one of the very first televised programs to be with my old buddy Steve Quayle. We want to bring you on. We're going to have your new book. And what's the name of your book, Steve?
Right now it's Little Creatures, The Gates of Hell Are Opening, Fact, Not Fiction.
So we want to have Steve come on. It'll be me, Steve Quayle, Gary Stearman, and I want to do at least 2 programs, if not a dozen programs, so as many as we can turn out while you are in our studio. And those are going to be some of the very first programs we're putting out there, because I know, Steve, that just like you and I talked about this stuff 6 years ago and people thought we might be stretching the facts, and now they're realizing that we were actually talking about this stuff before CERN was even admitting what was going on over there. We're going to do some more programming that's going to be just as provocative but also as prophetic. Did you see yesterday, I think it was yesterday, yeah, and this had to do with the Arizona Department of Transportation publishing this image that their street cam, road cam, whatever, these interstate cameras that they put up to watch for ice and snowstorms and whatever. There was a whole pack of what appeared to be a group of very large, mysterious animals. And the Highway Department in Arizona the Department of Transportation put it up on their website. Did you see that?
Yes, I did.
And it does seem to show something really sinister. I might have Donna put this on the front of Raiders News Update tomorrow, since we're talking about it, so people know what I'm talking about. Something very mysterious there. It looks like a whole herd of really large ape-like beings that are.
Sure, it looked, Tom. It looked like a family of Bigfoot. And what's interesting, that image was identical to a woman that called me, that Pastor John Kyle literally ministered to, who was terrified out of her life in Red Lodge, Montana, whose little girl was 4 years old. She was the great-granddaughter of an Indian, I think a Blackfoot medicine man, and a family of Sasquatch was showing up. And absolutely, it terrified the mother so much, and I believe she listens to the show tonight, and the little girl was literally being able to communicate. Now, saying that, when I saw that Arizona highway image, the first thing that I thought of 23 years being on talk radio, is the majority of sightings coming from Alaska, from the most remote parts of the earth, even Australia, even in the Himalayas. There are always seemingly more reports come to me, Tom, of families of Squatch, meaning, Sasquatch, families, meaning two, a male, female, and one or two offspring. That's the first thing that I saw first thing I thought when I saw what you're just referring to.
Yeah, well, and there was, the image, like I say, I'll have Donna. I'll just go ahead and have Donna put it up on the front of Raiders News Update tomorrow so that people can see what we're talking about. But there had to be 8, 10, 12, 14, something like that. It's a very large group. And if you compare them to the trees that are beside them, and you can get kind of a perspective because you can see the highway and you know how wide the highway is, so you can get a kind of a mathematical equation. These things all look to be somewhere between 7 to 9 feet tall. They look like they're walking out of the forest. But here's what makes this interesting to me, is that the Department of Transportation on their own Facebook wrote, and I'm quoting this now, quote, "We might have spotted a family of Sasquatches on SR 260 near Heber this afternoon," end quote. So here you have a highway patrolman, and this is what he's writing on their own Facebook. Well, they received so many thousands of comments, and people were over there commenting on the mythical powers of these beings, and you need to be careful, but they're also very concerned that they won't get hurt, blah, blah, blah. So many comments that then the Arizona Highway Patrol, they backed off and started saying they were just kidding. Problem is, for them, they have photographic evidence, and they have their first comments, which, as the Hagmanns know, as private investigators, one of the most important things you do is you take those first initial comments before people have time to think about it and reevaluate it and modify it and talk about it, and decide they need to protect their own butt or whatever it is they do, and then they kind of modify. It's the first comments that come out of their mouth and the photographic evidence, and they said, we just spotted a family of Sasquatches. Well, okay, bottom line, whether or not there is a benign explanation for whatever those things were, I find it interesting that something you were saying a moment ago, Steve, is so true, that there's been such an upsurge now in reports of Sasquatches, of winged-like, fairy-like beings. Some of these are on YouTube. You can look at them. They're creepy. Some of them are animated. They're not just still photos. They're actually moving, and they're spooky-looking. Elves, giant creatures that look like they're almost like they're got tree limbs or whatever for legs and arms. There's so much of that happening that the respected British magazine The Spectator just put out a new article this week. People can Google this and read it. It's called Return of the Fairy Hunters, and they discuss how the Fairy Investigation Society, now this is a really old society, we wrote about it, I think, in Exo Vaticana. They started out over 100 years ago as part of the British elite. But they've been conducting this new survey, and they're seeking information from anybody that has legitimate images or stories, something that can be documented, and they're looking for things like pixies, elves, sprites, And this is one of the things that I think makes your new book interesting, is that all of us out here in the prophecy community have been doing a lot of research and talk over the last few years about giants. But people often tend to forget that it isn't just giants. Sometimes these things are really small, but it doesn't make them any more terrifying or terrible. And all through history, they've been cited and they've been talked about. Well, anyway, so according to The Spectator, the British magazine The Spectator, in their survey, they had already, by the time I read the article, they had already received 400 reports. And, you know, in this type of investigative work, you want to just eliminate some of the articles that might seem like they're faked or whatever. But some of them are true. And the Spectator report has some interesting cases in there that resonate with what we know about occultic and biblical literature, history. For instance, there's a report over there of a guy walking down a field in Scotland, and he notices this winged being, and it's leaning up against the side of a sycamore tree, and this thing is 15 feet tall. I found his story to be somewhat believable, comparable to some of the reports that we've seen here in the United States. Now, there's another part of the Spectator feature that I found really interesting. Have you read this report, by the way?
No, I haven't.
Okay, I just recommend it to you. It just came out, so it might not have come across your newswire yet. It's just called The Return of the Fairy Hunters. But one of the other reports that I found there is they talk about how the Fairy Investigation Society was founded in 1927, but how it attracted so many well-known, illustrious members, people with lots of money, people deeply connected to occult societies, and they also name Walt Disney. And I've been, by the way, incognito at the Secret Club 33 at the Disneyland Resort. I've got pictures of me there, and I might publish them and write about them at some point. And I can tell you that that Freemasonic club, it does definitely host some true believers that understand a lot of the real magic behind some of Disney's iconic fairies and wizardry interests. These are people that they either know or they believe in the entities behind the fairies and the gnomes, the walking trees, the witches, and all that other stuff that's part of Walt Disney. And in fact, one of the other stories in the Spectator report involves this young man. He may have come across one of those creatures that's in your book. He was camping out on the moors. He goes out behind his tent to relieve himself, and suddenly he realizes that he's not alone. Go and read his report where he talks about how he looks down, and here is this silhouetted small shape. It's got its hands on its hips. It's got a very angry look in its face. He can see it through the light, and he says he can see it through the light that's coming through a large hole that's behind him in the hedgerow. But as soon as I read that, I thought, well, it's dark. Is it a hedgerow or is it a gateway, right? Anyway, yep. He got the impression that this thing was angry, that he was there. It scared him so much that he slowly backs away. He starts apologizing out loud to who or whatever is there, and then he gets the heck out of there. I found his story to be somewhat believable.
Right, and Tom, let me just share this. I have a lot of that documented, and it seems like, again, what's fascinating to me, and I'm just sharing this because this gets me excited. I don't mean to interrupt you, but that all of the events that seem to be taking place, whether it's on Native American reservations, whether it's in the moors of Scotland or on the moors of Scotland, Ireland, Britain. I mean, even people on trains, I think it was a BBC, I quote, an article London Daily Mail, where they're actually seeing these creatures running alongside the train. And I think people have got to understand, the point we're making is this. This isn't to scare you. This isn't to cause you trouble, but the point is that we're seeing the gates, the portals, if you will, opening, and these creatures are coming through. So I deal with that in Little Creatures because I wanted to have all the contemporary sightings that I could find. And can I tell you something interesting about the number 33, since you brought it up? When I went back through the scripture, I've never seen this before in my life. I think this happened, Doug, was it this week or last week when I said, Doug, It's amazing to me. There are 25 times the word Rapha, the root word for Rephaim, are used, and 8 times when Rephaim are used. So it's a total of 33 times, okay? Not 34, not 32. I had never seen that in 30 years of investigation. I immediately got a rush, meaning it was like electricity going through my body, and I thought, of course, all the genetic hunts that have been going on for the seed of the Rephaim, in other words, the giants, the fallen angel DNA, the field, just even the if you will, the supernatural charging of the cellular structure, 33 times. Does that not blow your mind even? Again, it's in the context of giants, translated the dead shall not rise to praise thee. That's talking about giants. So saying that, the 33, it finally dawned on me. I'll spell it out for everyone. These guys, and I'm not saying there aren't other reasons, but one of the biggest reasons they exonerate, they uplift, they worship the number 33 is because they're paying homage to, if you will, the gods they believe they are descended from or will become. Go ahead.
Yeah, and also, by the way, since I've been there incognito, I can tell you they're also exonerating and glorifying sex. They get some of the most beautiful women in the world, and it's amazing how these women come in to that club and are willing to prostitute themselves to these people with power and authority. And that, of course, goes back to the goddess worship, Gaia worship, the entities that are within the earth that feminize themselves, what the Pope's doing now. So, anyway, I started out a moment ago talking about what they're doing at CERN. And another one of the things that you'll find interesting, you guys, connected to these different sightings, and I guarantee you before I even say it that Steve's already documented this in his new book. But it's how CERN uses science, superelectronics. And one of the things in these stories that's often mentioned, it has to do with what I would call electrical charges that are associated with a lot of these sightings, because people talk about, how they can almost taste electricity in the air. They sense it on their skin. Their hair stands up on their skin as if they're in some kind of negative charge. They feel it in their stomach. I believe all those are clues to what? Portals that are opening, closing. They're discharging particle alterations. Whatever it is, there's an electrical phenomenon that's been reported in conjunction with Bigfoot, aliens, fairies, and this has happened around the world. So some people report they get this sickening feeling in their stomach. They get burning sensations on their skin. They feel temperature fluctuations. They feel a choking stench, like burnt electrical wiring in the air. Sometimes worse than that, they get paralysis. They're barely able to talk. Some of them have even had radiation poisoning that's been found, been documented in some of these cases where they were exposed to whatever this is. So whatever it is, some part of it has to do with modern physics that's being described when these phenomena are occurring, and we just try to imagine the mechanics of other dimensions. What's happening when they're opening, when they're closing, when they're interacting with our own world as we understand it. And that, of course, raises the question that the so-called little people, Loch Ness, hairy giants, that all of these are extra-dimensional. And that there is something in terms of particle activity. There's something in terms of physics as we do understand it that's happening in a way that we don't understand that might explain, if we did understand the physics, we might be able to explain it in quantum physics, whatever the qualities of this phenomenon is, because some of the stories involve these cryptids. They seem to be apparently invulnerable to things like bullets, but they also sometimes seem to be connected to what we would call ghosts or poltergeists. So there's something other dimensional about this. Now,
right, Tom,
let
me interrupt you there too. Tom, one thing that I've got to tell you, I can find no instance in literally thousands of accounts where these things aren't using some form of a portal or gate. Now that's really critical, okay? Because of the little creature, the guy was, basically urinating on his habitat. Right. The point being is I found none of the fact that the one thing they have in common is the ability to instantly vanish, okay? And people have seen doorways, they've seen, if you will, windows into the heavens. But again, see, this is why I get excited, okay, about Jesus. And you're the one that, and I've said this, I said I thank God for the revelation that I received from Tom. When you first started talking about the gates of hell, it never dawned on me those were stargates. Call me stupid, dumb, or whatever, but it just wasn't my time. But after that, everything began to fit into place. When you're dealing with the jinn, when you're dealing with what we call genies, what the Muslims call the jinn, you're dealing with entities that come through and escape through portals. This is why the Bigfoot or Big Feet, call them whatever, Sasquatch, Yeti, Howies, Yowies. There are over 236 names, and interesting enough, I think I told people this in True Legends. Probably the most mind-blowing book to me that I've written in relation to ancient history out of this one was not even so much the giants, it was all the legends. And how is it that Australia can have almost identical numbers of names for the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti as the United States? I thought that was interesting. Obviously, there are different species, etc., but the common denominator, Tom and Doug and Joe, is always stargates. So when you're talking about that electrical field, that electrical charge, you're talking about the same thing. When that story was posted today, Tom, about acoustic levitation, okay? And years ago, you and I did a show. Remember talking about the giants, and I said they had a special ability with their nasal pharyngeal passage to generate a harmonic that basically created anti-gravity. So that's how they could move 150, 200, 300, 5,000-ton blocks. And before, they thought the largest stone in the world was the stone of the pregnant woman in Baalbek, Baalbek. Then they found out in Russia there were stones, 5 and 10 times that size that could not have been moved in a normal way. And by the way, when Egypt said Hebrew slaves didn't build the pyramids, I categorically will stand on that, because the book of Isaiah talks about God and his boundary, and the point being is I don't buy for a minute the Hebrew slaves built the pyramids. I just want to go on record of that. I've never said that. I never believed it. But now with today's big news, ladies and gentlemen, and Tom, it's all coming to pass. The secret chamber into the king's room in the Great Pyramid, whether it was a hall of records, whatever they're hiding, to take a SWAT team into, pick on some poor Egyptian guy that just happened to break into something that no one knew about. This is the basis of almost all special operations worldwide, is to get the technology, get the artifacts, but you know what it boils down to at the end of the day? Power and control. So when you're talking about that Disney 33 and the most power, you know what I've learned? And I've not lived in that world per se, but I've interviewed a lot of. There are literally the women that want how should I say this, genetic transfer of powerful men's sexuality. I'll leave it at that, because they believe, in essence, they will, and I'm telling you point blank, this is coming from them themselves through a third party. They want to become, you ready for this word, goddesses. Isn't that amazing?
No, that's actually you're absolutely right. They want to give birth to the offspring of the gods.
Absolutely.
Now, but on this whole thing about electricity, portals opening, the things that are coming through them, as everybody knows or should know by now, we were greeted the last few days with news of something that may accelerate and may even be to blame for some of the so-called portal openings, and that is the startup again of CERN's Large Hadron Collider, the CERN Stargate. And it's not just coming back online, it's coming back online with much greater power than it's had before. And there's this whole internet buzz out there right now on the science community blogs this week, last week, because the officials at CERN said that the world's most powerful atom smasher, the Large Hadron Collider that Tom Horn and Steve Quayle talked about before it even opened, and we said it's a Stargate, they're going to use it to find portals, and people thought we were nuts, and now their own physicists are saying, well, actually, that's exactly what we're using it for. Now what they're saying, it's going to restart. The whole particle accelerator, it discovered last year one version of the Higgs boson. They think there might be several versions of the Higgs boson, the particle that gives mass to other particles that then, well, basically look at your own body. You're nothing more, and everything around you is nothing more than spinning electrons and protons, but the Higgs boson might be what holds it all together and gives it mass. In any case, this God particle was discovered. Now, they're saying that they're going to fire it back up, the whole LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, they're going to fire it back up now. They've spent the last 2 years on upgrades. Their own researchers say that everything they've done is for the purpose. You can Google this and read the press releases on science blogs for yourself, AP blogs, whatever. The whole purpose is to discover the existence of extra dimensions of reality beyond the 3 spatial dimensions of length, width, and depth, and the 4th dimension of time. So beyond Einsteinian physics, way beyond Newtonian physics, what they're saying is that they are, in fact, they use this language. They're going to open a door to other dimensions. And they're going to do this, by the way, by creating a magnetic field with the CERN collider. It's getting ready to come online. They're going to create a magnetic field that is 100,000 times more powerful than the Earth's magnetic field. Brother, let's just hope, that they don't fulfill prophecy as soon as they throw the switch. And if people think that I'm playing with words when I say they literally are planning to use this to open a dimensional doorway to other realities. Oh, and by the way, they may have opened some small ones last year. Remember, Steve and Doug and Joe, there was something that broke down on the collider last year. I forget what it was. They had essentially an electrical fire, and they shut it down, and they cooled it off. But then they restarted it. Before they shut it down to do all these current upgrades, they restarted it. And when they did, people all along the Swiss border were blogging about giant beings that were appearing and then they were disappearing behind a veil. Do you guys remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
absolutely.
I do.
Well, so CERN now, so they may have already opened small portals, but now their physicists are saying they've got 100,000 times the power of the Earth's magnetic field. And what is it they want to do? Sergio Bertolucci, or however you say his name, Bertolucci, he's the director for research and scientific computing at CERN. He says that not only might they find evidence for other dimensions, but they are going to create. So here's 2 different things. One is finding, one is creating. They're saying not only are they searching for, not only might they find, but they are going to create unimagined scientific phenomena, what he calls unknown unknowns. But then he describes it as a gateway to an extra dimension. And he said 2 years ago, he said, out of this door might come something, or we might send something through it, end quote. So that's a quote people can go look up. That's one of CERN's own leading physicists talking about how they're using CERN, what they intend to do. They're believers. In fact, besides Tom Horn and Steve Quayle, they're probably bigger believers than most people in the world that there are other dimensions and that there are gateways. And there are things that guard those gateways, and they're in some kind of a coalition with them. They're going to open those gateways. I wonder how many people know this. I wonder how many people know that the town that the Large Hadron Collider complex is situated in, St. Genus Paulili, I think is how it's called. In ancient Roman times, guess what the name of that town was? It was Apolliacum, and there was a temple there dedicated to Apollyon. So ask yourself, is it just an astonishing coincidence that the Large Hadron Collider, the CERN Stargate, is located in the very place where an ancient temple and town was dedicated to the king of the bottomless pit, Apollyon, this powerful fallen angel in the Bible that holds the key to the greatest stargate of all time that opens the bottomless pit during the Great Tribulation period and lets out these transgenic hordes, these cryptids that Steve Quayle's new book talks about, lets them out so that they can fulfill wrath all over the face of the earth. Is that a coincidence that they would put the CERN Stargate right where there was a dedication to Apollyon? In fact, if you look at the Large Hadron Collider from the air, it actually looks like a lock, and it also resembles the Masonic symbology of the pyramid and the all-seeing eye, which we've talked about a lot, Steve and I have. And all of this in a town that was once dedicated to the destroyer spoken of in the book of Revelation. So is it the lock that the star from heaven is going to open? I have no clue, but it's the occult symbolism that interests me. And I'm sure that listeners to this show have also noticed how the CERN Hadron Collider has encoded within it the Illuminati signature of 666. Have you seen that?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and in a lot of the minds of researchers, Dr. Michael Lake, I'm reading his book right now, by the way, The Shinar Directive, and I'm learning things I never knew before about Nimrod, what he did, his Stargate, what he proposed to do. He will return in the end of times. Of course, you and I, Steve, have done a bunch of shows on that. He's going to propose to do it again, but I'm learning a bunch of stuff in there. And Dr. Lake talks about how this logo at the CERN Collider is connected with the coming beast system. And it's, he refutes this whole idea that the logo's meant to resemble, I think, what they call synchronoton particle acceleration. But bottom line is, it's a symbol for 666. So all of this occult symbolism. And then, of course, there's what Steve said a moment ago, the idol of Shiva, just outside of CERN, Lord Shiva, the destroyer of the world. This great big giant statue of Shiva right in front of the CERN facility, right in the same place.
Tom, doing the cosmic dance.
Doing the cosmic dance, encircled by what? A stargate, a particle stargate, where it is destroying so that the other Hindu god, Bahram or whatever it's called, I forget, can come in and reconstruct the universe once again. But all of that where a temple to Apollyon once stood, who is of all things depicted in the scriptures as what? The destroyer. So you have both of these deities that are connected, one in Hindu belief, one in biblical belief, connected to gateways and demons that have the power to destroy, they have the power to open and close doorways, and all of this deeply encoded in the world's two most important geographies as well, by the way. The United States, the most powerful nation in the earth, and also the church. The Vatican in Rome has the same kind of symbolism as what you find there at CERN with the portals and the gateways, the domes and the obelisks, the 72 Apollonian demons of antiquity that are encoded right inside the dome of the United States of America, where probably one of the largest and most powerful stargates on earth exists. So here's the thing.
And by the way, Tom, the 72 also match the 72 at demon gates, okay? And they're literally called the demon gates. And isn't it interesting that corresponds with the 72nd imam, you know? It's a very, very interesting, and I think too that if you look at an aerial picture of the entire CERN complex, I mean you're looking at in essence another manifestation or representation of the Ouroboros, aren't you? You
are, and so then the question comes with what they're doing there. They themselves,
right.
They're telling us exactly what they're doing.
May I quote? Hey, Tom, let me quote something from the Septuagint. You referred to it before, but this is mind blowing, and I want to, explain to everyone that when you read the King James, if you go to the original Greek, and Tom, you offer the Septuagint you've got a really good price on it. You reproduced it, but let me read Isaiah 13:1-3. Open the gates, ye ruler. I give command, and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath. Now, for behold, the day of the Lord is coming, which cannot be escaped, a day of wrath and anger to make the world desolate. That's Isaiah 13:9. Again, this is the Septuagint, okay? And Babylon shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be inhabited, and monsters shall rest there, and devils shall dance there. What's Shiva, okay? And satyrs shall dwell there. Isaiah 13, the Septuagint. Now, you and I both know that the idea of this, they're using the word gates, they're using the word open the gates, Apollyon the destroyer, or as you called him in your book, Apollyon. But how relevant is the book of Revelation? Man, I think if everybody could, I'm one who can't, but do backflips, they should be doing backflips over the show, because we are telling them, I've seen everybody's charts. Man, I was raised with more charts than, a cardiologist with 10,000 patients. Every chart imaginable, okay? This is this, 7 years, all that stuff. But what we're seeing is the living revelation of the living God. And again, I go back to the words of Jesus, and the gates of hell shall not prevail. And the thing is that with all of the transgenic, you and I have talked about the mutagenic experiments going on. We've talked about the reanimation. Remember we used to get flack when we first did our shows, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago? We were talking about transhumanism and genetic engineering, and you guys are off your rockers. This isn't relevant to the book of, this isn't basic Christianity. Of course it's not basic Christianity. It's the meat of the word. And I still go back to my statement, Tom. From this night forward, I believe that now the appearances of these things, not due to mass hypnosis or hysteria, but because God has chosen this night for whatever reason, and I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, tonight is a satanic holiday, okay? So you and I are on international talk radio speaking to the world about stargates, speaking to the world about the coming one world government, the one world economy, and we're on, and we didn't plan it this way. This is just how it worked out with Doug and your schedule and my schedule. People need to know that. And I think I received an email. If I'm wrong, someone correct me. But I sent an email, and I think today, the 7th, is a very important date to the world of the occultists. Now, isn't that strange? I mean, I think that's not strange. I think that is divine appointment. To God saying tonight to his people, yes, this is coming. Yes, it's in my word. Seek my word. Take it to the Lord in prayer, but you don't have to be afraid. But I think that your concern, and I don't mean to speak for you, but you've addressed it this way, is that the modern day manifestation of that which calls itself evangelical Christianity is absolutely not dealing in a world of reality when we're in this stuff. They're going to be totally unprepared, and they're going to be blown over by it and seduced by it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's absolutely accurate. I mean, man, you've opened so many doors here. First of all, I want to talk about the Greek Septuagint. I want to talk about the vision that Isaiah saw. He talks about 4 different things: giants, monsters, devils that shall dance. In the Hebrew language, there's very interesting because it means demons that are embodied. They're embodied in something that is transgenic. Some of the other interpretations there talk about transgenic, weird kind of goat animals or something. And then he says satyrs, which is obviously a transgenic human animal. And he says they're going to be there. They're going to appear after what happens? After gates are opened. And notice that his language there. First of all, he's talking about Babylon, which is one of the most powerful stargates of ancient literature, as documented in the history and in the writings of almost every ancient society. But notice that it's plural, gates. It's not just one gate. He gives this command: open the gates, plural. What are they, all over the world? So they're going to open, and what's standing behind them waiting to come out? Giants, monsters, transgenic, satyrs, human-animal chimeras, devils that will be embodied in strange bodies of flesh, according to the Hebrew language. So there's these very terrifying things that essentially are made up of the fairies, the changelings, the things that you write about in your new book. They're waiting behind those gateways, and if you don't accept Isaiah, well, then that's fine. If you don't believe in the Bible, that's fine. If you don't think it's inspired, that's fine. But if you are a Bible-believing Christian, then you know that this prophecy has not yet been fulfilled, and it's a part of end times prophecy. Gates, portals, openings are going to occur. Of course, most of the world knows now that Chris Putnam and I, we went to Mount Graham. What most of the world doesn't know, we're going back. And as a matter of fact, here in the next 2 weeks, I have a film crew, Chris Putnam, going back to Mount Graham, and not only Mount Graham. We're going to gateways around the world. We're meeting with some of the people that live in those areas. We've also got a missionary set this up for me. You'll find this interesting. Some of the, the Anastasi that were written about by some of the Indians up in the Four Corners.
Sure, the ancient, by the way, Anasazi means the ancient ones?
Yeah, the ancient ones, the giants, they painted pictures of them on their caves. Well, we're going there. But we're meeting with men who are tribal members. They are former shaman who were converted to Christianity. And they are going to tell us, they've already told us some things that are blowing my mind. We've already got film that's blowing my mind. Some of this stuff is pretty scary, actually. But we're going to put it both in the form of a documentary film. Exo Vaticana, the movie, is the working title. I have no idea what it'll actually be called. And then we're working on another book that we're hoping to have out in about 3 months from now. And the title of that book is going to be On the Path of the Immortals. But all the book is really dealing with, Steve, is exactly what you've done in your new book. We're talking about gateways, those that are behind them. And this book will be accompanied by film that shows things coming through openings that I myself had a difficult time even looking at it. It's captured by the Native Americans with their own cameras in their own yards, focused on certain portions of mountains. So that's all coming. Bottom line, though, is it prophetic? Is it a trick of camera lighting? Is it something else? Well, some of these are definitely not. So what are they? The 16th chapter of the book of Enoch talks about the deceased offspring of the Watchers, the giants, the Nephilim, and a lot of other beings that are going to come forward in the days of slaughter. There's the book of Jubilees, ancient Jewish religious works that talk about how the Nephilim spirits with all these little beings that you're talking about are going to come through. But here's what takes us back to the first hour, and I know we're getting ready to go to another break. There's a buzz right now among these conservative Catholics that believe that Pope Francis might, as a matter of fact, be the fulfillment of the prophecy of the popes. They're saying, there's a buzz right now in which they're saying that this encyclical that he's working on, either it is going to deal with something that's beyond environmentalism, or he's working on a second encyclical. It's kind of confusing right now, but they're the ones writing about it. I'm only corresponding with them about it. What they're saying is he's working on something that is going to radically alter our understanding of cosmology. And this is something that Putnam and I predicted. Now, don't forget, I'm not elevating myself at all. I'm not a prophet. I'm not. And I don't hold myself up. I don't see myself as being smarter than anybody else. But I had some strong feelings. We wrote about them in Petrus Romanus, and we turned out to be right. Then we wrote Exo Vaticana, and I was able to get the leading papal astronomers to interview with me. We were able to go up to Mount Graham, meet up there, and we met with the Jesuits that are up there. Now what I'm telling you is something is coming. I'm hearing about it, and it's either this encyclical or it's a different encyclical, and it is going to change or dramatically change our understanding of church doctrine in link with the Vatican that has to do with Pope Francis as a Jesuit, and his connection to what I could only call ET theology, Stargate theology.
Tom, what would happen? Let's go to the break. But what would happen with this question? What if the powers that be have chosen to not give disclosure through the scientific community, but through the religious community of the Catholic Church, and let the Pope be the one that announces to the world that we're not alone, that we were created by the brothers who are believers as we are? I think, isn't that what basically that second thing could be alluding to? The fact that everyone's looked at disclosure, Greer and everybody else, SETI and all the UFO sites, but I don't think to this point, maybe I'm wrong, I'm not familiar with all of them, but I'm familiar with a lot of them. What would that say to the world if it was a Catholic Church under this Pope who announced to the world, we're not alone, we've had meetings with these guys, and then announces? That would put so much credibility into his hands, and it would simply take it out of the, quote, scientific community and put it immediately into the religious community. Isn't that an amazing thought?
Yeah, I think you might have just hit the nail on the head. Let's talk about that when we come back from the break.
Okay, Joe, Doug, whoever wants to take us out of this.
Yeah, we'll go to the top.
We've got some other things in the works that really, well, we'll just leave that for later. But we're going to come back from the break. Folks are listening to a very special edition of the Hagmann Hagmann Report. Our very special guest, Mr. Steve Quayle, stevequayle.com. Tom Horn, Raiders News Update. Really, do they need any more introduction? Steve, I'm going to kick it right back to you. Sans music. Go ahead, sir.
Well, again, the biggest, I'd say, revelation to me of the evening, and this happens when I'm on with Tom, what I just said, I want to make this clear. I love what Paul basically said in that episode or that recording that you played before, we went on the air, came back to us. But I think one of the most important things that people have got to understand, the deception is going to be so great and so real that if we're not grounded in the Word of God, that means it's our foundation, that means it's our daily bread, that means you've taken the warnings to heart. I would say after we're done with this show tonight, everyone should get on their knees and say, Lord, show me what's real, show me how to deal with this, because I can't deal with it in my own strength or my own mind, because we're talking about dimensional shifts, we're talking about everything. But I'm going to throw it right back to Tom. Tom, before I said that, have you ever thought of that the total disclosure would ultimately come in a religious setting through the Catholic Church with an announcement from the papal, writing, the second encyclical or whatever it's called, and that because 1.2 billion Catholics, I don't know what percentage of that, and let's say 2 billion people believe that, I mean, you're talking about a massive amount of error coming in instantly that will take people simply who aren't grounded in the Word of God and have a relationship with Jesus. I love what I forget who said it, but he said the question is whether you believe in Jesus or not. Does Jesus know who you are? Because the Scripture says he'll say to those who said, Lord, Lord, didn't we do all these things? Depart from me, ye who work lawlessness. I never knew you. So as important as it is to know Jesus, it's more important that he knows us. So have you ever thought about that before, or is that what you're ultimately driving at and driving for?
Yeah, look, Steve, it isn't just the 1.2 billion. It's those who are devoted to Catholicism and who believe that the Pope is the representation of Jesus Christ on earth. It's that, but it's also now note the evangelical community who very largely, not all, but largely are saying this is the Pope for all denominations. The Protestant, movement is over. And then it's also just the world at large that even if they don't believe, like, our president and other people snuggling up to this Pope, they may not believe in any of this. They may think it's all just a bunch of baloney. But they know where the power structures are, and they know those who have diplomatic and other kinds of, influence on the peoples of the world, religious influence. 70-some% of people in America say that they are religious. So you have to, you have to deal with those people, whether you agree with them or not, whether you're occultic or atheistic or whatever you are. You have to use words and language and diplomacy and whatever to try to endear yourself to the majority of the world's religious populations, and that's what this Pope is doing, and that's what the United Nations is probably going to do by inviting this Pope. And I believe that there is a coming moment. I think it's actually closer than most people realize, and I think it's going to stop the world in its tracks. I think there is a moment coming that a lot of people call official disclosure, where we're going to admit, we may say this, we may say we have found extraterrestrial life on another planet, or we may say something more shocking than that. We are in contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. And whatever that, announcement is going to be, I can very much envision that you're not going to walk down into the well of the United Nations with the President of the United States and not have the Pope standing right beside him to say, we have an announcement to make. We are in contact. Now, if you read the books, Petrus Romanus and Ex Vaticana, we made predictions a year in advance that came to pass. But there's something that we did after we wrote those books, in that we uncovered, after Francis was elected as the new Pope, how he has a historic relationship with the members of the VORG, the Vatican Observatory Research Group, that we were investigating and interviewing members of it when we went to Mount Graham about 1.5 years ago. And as a matter of fact, as a young adult, Bergoglio, Pope Francis, he actually earned a master's degree in chemistry from the University of Buenos Aires. He had scientific ambitions prior to entering the Jesuit order, including studies in astrobiology. So when we found that, it threw up kind of an alert to us that there might be a connection here. So we started looking into it. We found that when the current leader of the VORG, Jose Gabriel Funes, that we write a great deal about, we've done shows on him, so I won't talk about all the stuff he's been out there saying about it, how he would also baptize aliens. But when Funes, who is the leader of the VORG, when he entered the Jesuit order, guess who his examiner was? Pope Francis, Bergoglio. So you have this relationship between George Bergoglio, Pope Francis, going back a long time with these Vatican astronomers. Thirdly, there was a recent interview with the Catholic press, and Funes, the current leader of the VORG, said in that press release, he said that this first Jesuit Pope is going to turn his attention very soon to astrobiology. Now, that was, to me, that was like this giant flag jumping off the pages, because when people talk about this encyclical, what it's going to say, or what a second encyclical is going to say, and now you got Funes, who's got a historical relationship with Bergoglio going back for a long time, Pope Francis, Petrus Romanus, and him saying to the press that this Pope's going to turn his attention to issues like astrobiology. Man, I mean, it's spooky, but I can see the last chapter of Ex Vaticana coming to pass, right? So here's the thing. When Chris Putnam and I were out there doing shows on Petrus Romanus, we did one with you, we did a couple with you, on Hagmann and Hagmann. I think we also did one on another show. People would call in or email after the fact. And we were talking about Petrus Romanus, the end of the prophecy, who's this guy going to be? And we kept getting these emails over and over. People were saying, but what do you make of the Vatican extraterrestrial connection? And that's obviously because the Vatican spokespeople were out there talking about how they would baptize aliens and all that. So people wanted to know, what do you think? Is there some connection? But we wanted to be able to provide a really qualified answer. And so that's when we went to the horse's mouth. We went to Mount Graham. We talked to the astronomers there. And I will tell you, you don't just drive up to Mount Graham. You don't just get in a car and drive up there and say, hey, we're here to see the aliens. You know what I mean? This thing is fenced off. You got to be taken up there by a guard in a vehicle, and they got radios. and there's cops all over the place. There's university people all over the place. But anyway, we went up there. We met with the Jesuit that was on duty that day. He was very open, very cordial, very warm. You might even say he was Christian-like. He was Christ-like. We talked to him. He showed us everything. We walked around the telescope that belongs to the Jesuits. And then we went to the radio telescope that's just up the road from them on the top of that mountain, and then we went to the large binocular telescope. And I think we've talked about all that.
Yep. Well, can I ask a question, because I think this is critical? I want to make a statement, too. By the way, Timothy Alvarino, this is important to our discussion, and I just uploaded, while we're on the air tonight, he just uploaded me. He just did a 28-minute Alvarino analysis on the United States, America, Amaruca, the land of the plumed serpent. And Tim sent me a text message, I think yesterday, and stated he found some mind-blowing stuff, because Francis Bacon obviously believed America would be the new Atlantis. And just so you know, Tim, and I think I've told you this, again, as Tom Horn just announced what he and Chris are doing, Tim is headed, we're working on a project to send Tim and a film crew to an area where there are reportedly live giants, and we're going to be announcing that on my website. And you've already seen, I think, the video we'll be posting of our conversation. Tim was in the clouds of Peru with a friend of his who basically, at the last place he was located before they went up the mountain, was a Catholic church. And interestingly enough, the nuns and the priests would tell him how the farmers would lose some of their livestock, and they would literally find not only the bones of some of their livestock, something big had eaten them, but they'd also find, listen to this, cattle 30 feet up in the air in trees, live cattle. In other words, like someone just was playing with them. And Tim basically, has got an expedition going. He knows South America very well. But just again, ladies and gentlemen, Tom and I, and Tom's never told me what he just shared with you on the radio, and we're getting an expedition. And I say in this thing that we'll post pretty soon, as soon as it's all final edited and everything, that the difference between most people who are dealing with the subject matter of giants and elves and all the supernatural entities, fallen angels, all that stuff, they're looking in a rear-view mirror. We're going forward, and what you're saying and I'm saying are both, see, this is what I'm saying about the Lord God of heaven giving us a time lock, and that time lock seems to be tonight to release us. So whatever God has purposed in his heart, and I'm not trying to be super spiritual, I'm just telling you, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I did not talk to Tom Horn, he did not talk to me. Two separate expeditions. We also have been in contact, and not in this country, with other where people, the natives, are totally talking about the gates opening, the things coming through them. Marcus Samuel out in the reservation, Brother Marcus, he's talking about literally stargates opening up. They've seen, I think he and Curtis have seen, things coming through gates that just seemingly appear in the sky between certain rock formations. And Tom, one of the most amazing things I know of right tonight that is so astronomically important, pun intended, is that as I trace all of the legends of giants, little creatures, supernatural entities, would you believe that they all sink in at some point in their oral traditions with burning mountains, i.e. volcanoes, and even the ancients believe that the magma, not because of the heat, but because of the electric current, was kind of like, if you will, a prison for fallen entities, okay? And now, as of yesterday, I think we had 41, according to Volcano World, we have 41 active volcanoes, and as I stated at the beginning of the show, and you were talking about situation with Arizona Highway, there are absolute scientists who are on Popo, and thanks to Bill for sending me that, but the Mexico City, and I think the height of that was 17,000 feet or whatever, and the thing that's interesting is they're talking about giants who can traverse 3 hours of a normal man in 10 minutes. So notice where it's at, the volcanoes. And interestingly enough, when you look at Mount Rainier, Mount Shasta, Mount Hood, all the Cascadia region, in tracking Bigfoot, Sasquatch, all that, every single incident are always talking about gates or caves, and from the outside a cave can be a portal, at least a cave entrance, and they're always located on, you ready for this, either active or dormant volcanoes. I find that interesting. And even Obama, there was a quote attributed to him about the ancient gods coming forth out of the volcanoes. And where are they coming right now? One of the most seismically active regions in the world is Indonesia. And I'm telling people, look, this isn't quackery, this isn't whacked out. The electric current of magma as it flows is evidently some kind of a containment field. And Tom, what are they doing with the Hadron Collider? They're messing around with the electrical, physical, and all the different forces that you and I aren't allowed to know about unless we're introduced into the world of Illuminati physics, unless God gives it to us. And I believe this. I believe that as we speak tonight, again, I want to make I can't get away from this. People are going to see more and more of these events taking place. And notice this, in Oklahoma, the very first place of an open satanic ritual, that was the place of the first beheading of an American. Blood is crying out for blood. And the United Nations, as most people know, David Rockefeller gave that property to the United Nations, and it was on the grounds of one of the biggest slaughterhouses, animal slaughterhouses in New York's history. So I think it's fascinating. If I'm seeing this thing as it is, I'm seeing every gate coming to a point, and I believe, and you and I have talked about this, that when they punch the hole through with the Hadron Collider, that's when all the other gates open up.
Well, so Alberino's doing what? He's going there with a film crew. What is he filming?
Yeah, he's headed to South America.
So when he's done, he actually emailed me a couple of days ago, and I told him that we are probably within about 2 weeks of having Skywatch Television's website up. And once the website is up is when we're going to actually start putting this out there on television. And we will have daily news updates. But when Alberino and you produce the special reports, we're going to put those in the updates and put them on Skywatch Television. And I can tell you, what he's doing is really important, more important than I would have even thought, a few years ago before I started doing the Exo Vaticana research. Petrus Romanus was really important. I think it's even prophetic. But what we did in Exo Vaticana was more important. What you're doing with your new book, your new research, Alberino's research, is actually more important, I think. It's more prophetic. It's more important in the sense that it prepares people for what is coming, what they should be prepared for, because people's hearts are going to fail them for fear when they see what is coming upon the earth. And that's part of what I learned. The Christian converts among the Indian people there in Arizona that were opposed to the Vatican going up on the top of that mountain to build a telescope. I mean, I'm so naive. I thought the reason that they were opposing the Vatican going up there, NASA going up there, was that it was Holy Land. That's what I thought, right? That would make sense. It's where their forefathers and foremothers lived and died and were buried, and so it's holy ground, and that's why they opposed them going up there. Well, then I learned from the natives themselves, man, you got this story completely wrong. We oppose them going up there because this is one of the 4 holiest mountains in the world to the Native American Indians, and it is because it is a gateway. It is a stargate. It's a portal. It's an opening. It's a place where beings can enter and exit, and for the most part, they're holy men, they're shaman. They don't want the gate open. That's the point. They don't want it open, because if you look back in their history, their creation mythos, when the gate opened once before, it didn't end very well. Giants came through. They came through and they started spilling out across the entire Arizona basin down there. They were
the desert Southwest.
Yeah,
the desert Southwest.
They were cannibalizing people. They began crying out to the great sun god, who they didn't even know who he was, but they're crying out to him to save them. And it's pretty interesting if you read their mythos. It sounds almost like you're reading the Book of Enoch, that these giants came through, then God destroyed them, he swept them under the hills of the valley. And that's very conducive to the American Indian belief all throughout Arizona, for that matter all across the United States, where these things were swept under the mounds, and then they heaped more dirt on them and buried them until, it was invaded by the Mexicans and later by, us white people that came along and dug up the mounds and took all the bones and hid them all. Anyway, bottom line is that's why they filed their lawsuit. They did not want the Vatican going up there because they don't trust that the Vatican has an ulterior motive for what they are doing up there on a mountain where a gateway can be opened up. And that sounds just astonishing. It sounds unbelievable. We thought that, the Indians, they're fighting the Catholic cowboys. We found out that wasn't the case at all. It's a portal. And they believe that.
Right, and then let me tie into that. I get a lot of flack because I live, close to Yellowstone Park. I'm 30 minutes away in a helicopter and probably 70, 80 minutes away in a car. Unless a highway patrol wasn't active. But no, just joke. I obey the speed limits now. But the point is that the Native Americans, in researching the history of Yellowstone, it's fascinating. They didn't want to tell the white men originally, outside of the explorers that found it, about it because they were concerned with the white man would release the evil ones that were contained in underground. People say, well, that's just all superstition. No, it wasn't. Because, and I actually found, you'll love this, a book written by some guy in the late 1880s from Bozeman, Montana, named after John Bozeman, that had talked about that. And in all the years I've researched that, I could never get an answer. And then I finally got my answer. So here's the thing I'm seeing too, especially the Native Americans that are the ones that have come to know Jesus. I am telling you this, the most in-touch people, whether they know Jesus yet, I'm praying they do come to know the Lord, but they know what's going on. They are seeing the changelings. They are seeing all this stuff, and they're seeing it in real time, And so the point being is that the activity, I would say this, if you and I first spoke, whatever, let's say it was a 1 then, we're at 8 going on 9, with 10 being total. No one can deny it any longer. No one can say this stuff isn't real. And I think people have got to understand that the war in heaven will take place on earth, and these supernatural creatures and the holy angels of God and the people of God that believe him that will do exploits, as the book of Daniel says, we're going to deal with this stuff. I get emails all the time. I don't know that you do, but I do. Why do you even talk about this stuff? It isn't relevant. Oh, yes, it is. And I can say this, since I started on talk radio, and I'm sure you can say the same thing with writing, I've had more people thank me for explaining stuff in a biblical context. The reason why the children of Israel went in and killed every man, woman, and child, people said, what kind of a God is that? Well, it's a God who wanted to protect his people from getting eaten because they were hybrids. And I'm just saying this, ladies and gentlemen, the stuff we're talking about is critical to you and for you to understand, because you're going to encounter somebody who, when they get freaked out, you'll have answers for them. And isn't that what the scripture says, that we know how to give answers to all men when we're basically presented with an honest question? I mean, obviously smart donkeys won't listen to you, but or dumb donkeys, but the point being is that we're giving people tonight this stuff. But back to Mount Graham, the Anasazi were the ancient ones. Do you know why they built themselves under the cliff? It's because they didn't want to get eaten. There was even a giant known to play soccer with their little bodies before he ate them. And I forget which book I wrote about that. And actually, I was given permission to print one of the gentlemen who's done a lot of study in the desert Southwest. It was the American position there is no cannibalism amongst the desert Southwest natives. That simply isn't true. When you go to Mesa Verde, I've got photos of it on my website. You can go on it on my photo galleries. posted one a couple of weeks ago. You'll notice they're built under a cliff. That's so these guys couldn't see them to eat them. And it's an amazing story, Tom, just what you guys are doing. So once again, I'm blown away. I have to find out what you're doing. You have to find out what I'm doing by coming on Hagmann and Hagmann and sharing with the people. Then we know what each one of us is up to.
Yeah, and I'm sure that people out there think that you and I are talking all the time, and so that when I'm talking about meeting Chris Putnam, and I've sent a film crew already to go interview the Native Americans, and we're gathering film footage about these stargates and portals and American, people are thinking, okay, well, Tom and Steve, they've coordinated this conversation, but it's not true. As much as you and I are good friends and we love doing radio together, we go months and months without ever even talking to each other, and we never share with each other what our projects are. I've got a project right now, by the way, and it is so top secret. In fact, it's probably the most top secret project in my history that I'm working on, and I've hired a couple of mathematicians, experts, to try to verify, and I'm not just talking about mathematicians, I'm talking about the people who invented the computer systems that are being used today to decrypt mathematical calculations. I've got them looking at something for me. And if it is what I think it is, it'll eclipse anything I've ever done before. It's actually very scary. I'm actually hoping they'll find out that I'm wrong. But I got an email from them just last week, and they gave me part of their first analysis that seems to verify that what I think is actually true. It's really spooky. But jumping back onto what you were talking about, Alvarino, what you're doing, what the American Indians were saying. Look, for those that think that might only be an American Indian idea, that specific locations of the earth are literal areas, specific locations where there are gateways, geographic locations where doors can open and close, hyperdimensional, supernatural, whatever you want to call them. The Bible talks about this. Look at Moses going up to Mount Sinai, and it's only there that he meets with God. Note that when Jesus returns, it says his feet will touch the top of the Mount of Olives, and then he descends down from that point. In the apocryphal Book of Enoch, which is still in some versions of the Bible, of course I also republished it, Book 1 of the Researcher's Library. But read that, the days of Jared, Noah's great-grandfather, 200 powerful angels known as watchers. They come down on the Mount Hermon, and from Mount Hermon they walk down into the valleys of the plain, and the language around that mountain means the forbidden place. And years later, here's Jesus, and he's with his disciples in Caesarea Philippi, and he's facing Mount Hermon because he's right in that area. And that's where the Greeks at the time had built this dedicatory, if you will, to the horned demon Pan. And it's right where Jesus says, the gates of hell. So imagine that, Steve, this verse that's meant so much to me and meant so much to you. What Jesus is standing in front of and looking at when he says, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. It's right there with this giant gateway in Caesarea Philippi, dating back to these watchers that came down. These gates will not prevail against my church. How cool is that, right?
I mean, it's marvelous. It's wonderful. I rejoice with the psalmist. I honestly wish I could do backflips. To me, a backflip is the ultimate expression of God's power in my life, rejoicing before Him. David danced before the Lord. I'd like to do a handspring, and I'm only saying that to say that He's so marvelous. God is so wonderful, so magnificent that He would reveal these things to us. I love the difference between Jesus Christ and all the other prophets. Number one, He's the Son of God. He said, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." That really makes people mad. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, Tom? The absolute what's the word I want? Revulsion to the name of Jesus, the repulsing of anything to do with Jesus, the mockery of Jesus on TV with the Simpsons and all these cartoons. I would think this, and yet no one will say what needs to be said. The spirit motivating the murders throughout the world are the religion of the sword. The blood being shed, yet mainstream television, the mouthpieces, it's like when God says in His Word, because they don't love the truth, He's going to send them strong delusion that they believe a lie. I think what's interesting tonight, we are contrasting all the world events, and I think on Coast to Coast they want me to talk about the economy, which I'm prepared to do, and what to expect there. But the thing that's fascinating to me is we're right back in that time now where as the days of Noah, we've talked about that, and I said this, and I don't think I said it on Doug's show, I may have, forgive me if I've repeated myself, ladies and gentlemen, but I find it interesting that secular Hollywood brings out a story of Noah, absolutely bastardizes, and that's a legitimate word, the biblical Noah, makes the watchers the good guys, and they come out with Exodus, making Moses, who was the meekest man in all the earth that the Scripture teaches, into this angry man, and absolutely void of the supernatural. But what's telling to me is not that they quote, murdered the biblical revelation of Noah or murdered the biblical revelation of Moses, but look at the timing, just as in the days of Noah. Just as in the days, what happened? And Exodus was God's deliverance for His people from the oppressor. And obviously there was supernatural oppression in Egypt, all the demons and demigods, and then there was the real, there was the earthly, if you will, those endued with supernatural evil to enslave God's people. I see the parallel today. You and I on the radio tonight, again, January 7th, as how should I say that, being tasked by the living God to prepare God's people for the next unfolding revelations. And the same words, I think it's 360 or 365 times, God says, fear not. People can embrace the end times with excitement, with victory, with praise, and total reliance on the living God. It's not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about stuff, and I just want to say one thing about my book again. I'm not pushing this because I want to sell books. I'm pushing this because the information is, I felt like the Lord. I said, Lord, is it time for me just to quit this stuff? And I tell you what, somebody said, well, you never win when you quit. I said, I've thrown in the towel so many times, I should have opened up a laundromat, okay? But this is one time when I knew that literally I was on to something. And again, I deal with stargates in a more real way, but this is the way it's unfolding. And isn't it interesting, when you go to study the Anasazi, by the way, the Anasazi were small, but when you're talking about that area of the world, you're also talking about Pedro, and most people don't know this, look it up on the internet, Pedro the mountain mummy. There are, and whether it's the Hopi ant people, we're talking about global stories, oral traditions, and we're talking about stuff, and I think it's fascinating. The people who live in a virtual world better not throw any rocks at those of us who are researchers in the real world, because those guys can't even tell who they are anymore, because they have to assume identities in the video game world or the video reality world, the Sims or whatever, and so I think it's fascinating that we're how do I say this, we're being juxtaposed, Tom Horn, what the Lord is having us to do, what the Lord is having where to go, and as we go there, I think it's amazing that, again, God sent them out by twos. You just have to be going to one part of the world, and I'm going in the other. But the point being is it's to His glory, and I think people need to understand this, that this could be looked at as probably, and I believe it is, a turning point for the events that lie ahead. You've heard by Tom Horn, ladies and gentlemen, where we're headed with the fulfillment of Revelation, what the Septuagint, the Greek, share, Tom, real quick, what the Septuagint is, because I think 99% of people listening to us don't know.
Oh, it's the Greek interpretation of the Hebrew Old Testament that was then in the 1800s translated into English. And, they gathered 72 of the top. Don't you love that number, 72?
Yes.
They gathered 72 of the top Jewish scholars at the time. And the king of Greece, who was building the great library there of Alexandria that later caught on fire and burned up, he put them into position to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek, because Koine Greek at the time of Christ and at the time of his disciples was the common language. Most people think that, the disciples of Jesus and all the people that were listening to him, that they spoke Hebrew. They didn't. At the time of Christ, Koine Greek was the common language. It's like saying that English is the common language in America. And very few people, except for rabbis, actually spoke in Hebrew. So Jesus could, Paul probably, a few, but most people couldn't. And so the Hebrew people needed a Bible, a Hebrew Old Testament, in a language that they could understand. So that's where the Septuagint came from. They gathered these 72 Hebrew scholars, brought them together, and translated it into language that at the time of Christ and his disciples they could understand. As a matter of fact, there are several references in the New Testament that imply that Jesus and his disciples were actually reading the Septuagint version of the Bible. And so what happened a few years ago was I decided that the English version of the Greek version of the Hebrew Old Testament ought to be republished, a trustworthy version of it. And so I did that. I put the Septuagint, I think it's volume 3, in the Researcher's Library of Ancient Texts. And I should say, by the way, that series of books is advertised on your website over there right now. Right now we have it at half-price sale, $75. These are giant books. And they're like 1,000 pages long. They're as big as a phone book. These are giant books, and it is a collection of all the ancient wisdom literature. So everything from the Apocrypha to the Septuagint you mentioned to these other books. And it's the all-time best-selling works. They never stop selling. People everywhere want them. Right now, we've got them at 50% off. When I'm on Hagmann and Hagmann, I always feel like I should do some kind of a book promo. We just released this brand new book called Redeemed Unredeemable. We've never done a show on it. I haven't done any shows on it because I got busy. But this book's really important. It took me into the dark corners of America's maximum security prisons. I spoke with people like Charles Tex Watson, the main hitman for the Manson family murders. Spoke with David Berkowitz, better known as the Son of Sam killer. I verified, by the way, among other things, the role of Satanism and human sacrifice. This is something that you've talked about before, Steve. David Berkowitz as the son of Sam, there was a question during the investigation that this had something to do with human sacrifices. It was all denied. Well, he admits it for the first time in this book, Redeemed Unredeemable, that he and some other people, they were actually practicing. And these people that were slain in order to increase their satanic power. He admits it, and he admits some other stuff about the people that were involved with him in those satanic sacrifices and how they died under very mysterious circumstances, stuff that's never been published before. Anyway, if you've ever watched the HBO series True Detective, I was able to confirm much of what's depicted in that series about the cover-up of Satanism. Though that's not what that book is about, I was able to do that. Well, anyway, much of what we've been discussing tonight is documented in that book, some of my other books, Petrus Romanus, Zenith 2016. So I tell you what I'm going to do. If people, I'm going to do one of two things. If they go to stevequayle.com, click on that banner where they can get the Researcher's Library of Ancient Texts half off, or if they just buy the book, Redeemed Unredeemable, I'm going to give them Petrus Romanus, Zenith 2016. And right now at Survivor Mall, they're already giving away a second book with Redeemed Unredeemable and a movie. So if listeners to Hagmann and Hagmann go to Survivor Mall and buy the book Redeemed Unredeemable. On checkout, just type in, I heard you on Hagmann and Hagmann, and I will make sure that you not only get the free book they're already giving away in the movie, but you get Zenith 2016 and Petrus Romanus, which is a lot of the background about what we're talking about now. If you go to Steve Quayle's website, you click on the banner there, and you get the Researcher's Library of Ancient Texts half off. Just remember, type into the comment section there when you check out, I heard you on Hagmann and Hagmann. I'll make sure you get Petrus Romanus and Zenith 2016. I did that as a fluke the first time I was on this show, and since that time, for whatever reason, I always felt obligated, Doug and Joe, to do something special for your listeners only. I want to add something that was on my mind, though, a moment ago, Steve, when you was talking, and I had started talking about how people who may criticize you or criticize me, talking about these American Indian locations and these stargates and portals and these mountains, and I said that was a biblical precedent. There's a very long list of evidence that is a fact, and I talked about Moses and Sinai and the book of Enoch, and when Jesus returns, he comes down on the mount. But that list literally goes on and on. Look at Genesis 28, Jacob's ladder. And what happens with Jacob and his night vision of his ladder? He wakes up the next morning. What has he seen? Angels ascending and descending, coming through this doorway, this gateway. And it's a very specific location. In fact, it's so specific that it scares the thunder out of Jacob. He gets up, he takes out oil, he starts anointing the whole place. But what does Genesis 28 actually say that he says? It's not what most people say today. He doesn't just call it the house of the Lord. That's what most people say. Jacob anointed it, and he called it the house of the Lord. That's not what he says. Read Genesis 28 for yourself. What he actually says is this. He says there is a gate here to the house of God, an opening. And it was somehow open the night that he was there. Angels are ascending and descending through it. But he doesn't say this is the house of God. He says there is a gateway here to the house of God, very much like Nimrod's building of the Tower of Babel, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I mean, look at Nimrod. Nimrod begins to be a mighty warrior, a Gibborim. And many people believe that those Gibborim are the offspring of the Watchers and the Nephilim. I'm trying to, as I'm sitting here, and I know we got 10 minutes, Steve, I'm trying to remember something you sent me the other day. You were talking about the introduction to your new book, and you were talking about the Nephilim, the Gibborim, and something that a lot of people make a mistake about it, and I can't.
Well, yeah. Here's the thing. It's interesting. If you look at the Septuagint in Genesis 6, chapter 4, Doug asked me about this. The words Nephilim only appear twice. Okay, the Hebrew. People argue, but basically Nephal to fall. The fact is, the Septuagint makes the distinction between Nephilim and Rephaim. Here's what I was trying to, and that's what I sent you, Tom. The word Nephilim appears once before the flood and once after the flood. I'd never seen that before. I don't know if you had, but I haven't. After the flood, after Numbers 13, 33, 34, whatever, every time the giants are spoken of, it's always in the form of the Rephaim. Never again in the New Testament, the Old Testament, is any reference to the Nephilim, okay? The confusion comes, and this is where I think in the past we've talked about this on the air. Tim Alvarino made a statement. He said nowadays everything's a Nephilim. First of all, a demon is a disembodied spirit of a giant. People can read that in the book of Enoch, or they can read it in the book of Giants, both Dead Sea Scrolls. But what blew my mind, and again, maybe you'd seen it, but I never had, that the only reason why the word Nephilim, and again, in the King James, they translated giants, But I made the statement that after Numbers 13, 32, 33, whatever, someplace in there, I said that it's never used again, and that's what I was stating at the beginning of the show. It's fascinating. There are 25 times that the word Rapha, which can be translated the dead, isn't this interesting? Shades, ghosts, versus Rephaim, those who descend from the fallen ones, okay? Those combined are 33 times. So let me just announce this, too. I'm updating Genesis 6 Giants. That's been the seminal work I've done. And, Tom, I got to be blunt with you. I've come upon new information from antiquity that's absolutely mind-blowing. And, first of all, most people don't realize that Charlemagne was a giant by anybody's standards. Most people don't realize that King Arthur, and by the way, King Arthur's name was Arthur Pendragon, which means that Arthur, son of the dragon, Merlin was, and when we talk about fairy tales, the oldest book in the world, poetic narrative, is what? The Epic of Gilgamesh. I remember being told by special operations generals when, prior to Iraq, one of the reasons why they were going in there is when Gilgamesh's tomb was unearthed, okay, in Iraq, that there was a fight to see who could get to the tomb and get the mummy of Gilgamesh before anybody else could. So when you know who the Epic of Gilgamesh talks about this warrior, basically hybrid, fighting monsters and going into the bowels of the earth, etc., it brought to light a whole new realm of warfare that I was not, and I couldn't know this stuff, okay? I could not know this stuff until people told me who were in a position to know. It's just like another general said to me, he said, Steve, it's not what's above ground in the Giza Plateau, it's what's underneath. And he said, you know all that money we give to Egypt, the Egyptian government, for arms and whatever? He says it's to buy their silence. Have you ever heard that before?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the point being is that I know we've talked about it, but where I'm going with that is simply this. It's imperative that people understand that this giant thing isn't a bunch of, basically Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, Jack jump over the candlestick. And as I stated before when I was talking to Doug, isn't it interesting? When we think about even the fairy tales, Jack the Giant Killer, fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman, and I was told that these giants hunt by DNA, by the resonance, by your frequency, by my frequency. And it's fascinating to me now that if you go in reverse logic, the entities that believe they are the supermen, the Ubermensch that Nietzsche talked about, who are spending trillions of dollars to identify the bloodlines. And, everybody was asking me, why are they taking DNA tests? If you're on the red list, you're on the red list. I said, well, they just want to make sure they don't kill any of their relatives. And I stand by that statement. They don't want to kill, the great-great-grandson, I'm making this up, 100 times removed from Nimrod or Gilgamesh. And again, most people couldn't even embrace that thought when you and I first went public with this, They just couldn't embrace it or handle it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're down to the last couple of minutes, but please take advantage. I'll turn it right back over to Tom. You can close it out. But Little Creatures, a new book. It's that critical. I think it's 455 pages. Special pricing. You got to send me a check because it's not up on my shopping cart, and you'll save 25%. It's a marvelous undertaking, and as people who have just read the chapters, some of the interesting chapters in it that I found the most mind-blowing to me were basically the aquatic little creatures, goblin spirit, the jinn, imps and other creatures, fairies, and then the Stargate, quicker than the eye. Chapter 6 of my book deals with Stargates, and again, Tom, I have researched probably, I'd say 500, I don't want to say 1,000, but events, and they're always associated with Stargates. So when you wrote, obviously, what you wrote in fiction years ago, now it's in practice. Now we're seeing references literally daily, if not weekly, about people having encounter with these things, I say God's making a strong case that you guys, you better be aware of this, because this is the stuff coming on the earth. And I think this is what Jesus meant when he said men's hearts failing them for looking after those things coming upon the earth.
And
Go ahead,
Steve,
Tom.
Yeah, and Steve, I can't wait to get you into our studio in Missouri. We're going to do a bunch of shows on your new work, on your new research. I mean, and you're right. You and I have talked about this, but now here it is. The whole 72 stars. People don't even know that in Washington, D.C., the whole apotheosis of George Washington up inside the U.S. Capitol Dome, why does it have 72 pentagrams around it? It's because the occultists who designed it and turned it into a stargate know exactly what they're doing, how it will relate to end times prophecy as depicted in your book. And those who are, you know, Isaiah, what does he describe? Cryptids, half goat, half men, monsters that are waiting behind these gateways. And he says that the moment that God or whoever it is gives a command, open the gates, ye ruler, I give command and I bring them. And then the gate opens. Gates, actually, plural, open. And these things start spilling out across the earth. This is exactly what your book is about. And so can't wait to get you here and to get you in the studio, you and me and Gary Stearman, to do some shows and programs on this because it's completely relevant.
And I just want to share an interesting. Hey, Doug, I want to share this from Randy Conway. I put it up already. Randy is a very gifted poet. I mean, really anointed. And here's what he gave me. And I asked him to take it to the Lord and ask him to write something. And this is what he wrote. I can make it in the time we have. The world is full of giants, and there were giants in the earth in those days. This is not myth or fiction. This is what the Scripture says. The men of old who became the men of renown, the evidence of their exploits can still be found. The world is full of giants. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be. What could these words mean to you and me? Did not the giants of Noah's day feed upon men's flesh? How will we survive a world of ubiquitous Gilgamesh? We were like a wind appearing out of nowhere. Denial makes us comfortable, and we believe if we ignore the words of the Scripture and the prophets repeated over and over, that the events to come can be called just another theory, and things can be laughed away by calling them conspiracy. Trust us we feel in our guts and in our hearts. Giants we believe belong in myths or legends or lore. They're acceptable, kept in storybooks and movies, but nothing more. We're all too consumed with admiring the work of our own hands, to see the things of prophecy or mysteries moving across the land. Then we're ready. The disciples of Jesus were enamored with the temple and its construction, but while they were saying, look, Jesus said to watch, there's coming a destruction. This destruction is upon us. We did not see it coming, and the seed is now corrupt. What missignation has changed our seed? What gateways have been opened? What will next erupt? And then he said, what did Enoch know and what the ancient words have been ignored? What runs the mountains of Mexico that has never been seen before? What is seen along the highways, the backwoods and forests of the world? What shall be our fate when the Zamzumans are exposed and the truth has been unfurled? We must watch, but what are you watching? Where are you looking? The Emim, giants, approaches. Who are you watching? The question is raised for the day of the Lord encroaches. Transhuman or non-human, birth or made matters little. If Rephaim can walk free, repentance is the only preparation for truly. As in the days of Noah, so shall it be. That's put up on my website, The Dreams and Vision. Pretty astute, wouldn't you say, Tom?
Absolutely. You have this whole prophecy, the second book of Joel, parallel in Revelation 9, and it talks about this very end times volcano of hybrids, great people and strong. The Gibborim, he says, they're going to run like mighty men. They're going to run like mighty men upon the walls. The Gibborim, the giants, they're coming. There are great people and strong, he says. That's all biblical prophecy, that these gates are going to open. They are coming. And people need to listen to what Steve Quayle has to say on this issue. Hey, Joe and Doug, thank you for allowing us to come on here tonight to talk about prophetic issues that we think are today and tomorrow's headlines.
You know, I got to say, you're very generous with your offerings for books. Go to stevequayle.com, click on the banner, and don't forget, in the comments section, make sure you mention that you heard them on Hagmann and Hagmann for the discount for the free books, and that's a generous offer. And I'll tell you something, I'm going to be taking advantage of that as well, only because you cannot have too many copies of your books, regardless of the title. And Steve, thank you so very much for everything, and for your hard work and all of this. And both you gentlemen are just class acts, and really, really honored to have the privilege of sharing the soundstage with you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. God bless.
Yeah, thank you, and look forward to the programs we are going to do with Steve Quayle on Skywatch Television involving his new book and research.
Fantastic. All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you so much. We've reached the end of the program. Both of you, good night, and be safe.
God bless.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. That'll do it for us tonight. We are
tomorrow night.
You're out of here.
Tomorrow night, Daniel Duvall will be joining us, and it should be a fantastic show. He is an author, and looking forward to that. Until then, stay safe, God bless, and have a great night, everyone.